When Marshal Jed Crow promised his prettiest daughter to any cowboy brave enough to tame his killer black stallion, every drifter and fortune hunter in 3 counties rode into Redwater Crossing with dreams of claiming the legendary beauty, Rosalind Crow. Noah Briggs was no different, a man with nothing but calloused hands and something to prove, desperate to win the flawless, silk-clad woman who represented everything he'd never had. But the marshal's bargain hid a cruel trick, and the daughter who would change Noah's life forever wasn't the one standing on the platform in satin and lace. She was the one in the shadows, feeding the beast everyone else feared, heavy, work-worn, and invisible to a town that measured worth by appearance alone. If you're enjoying this story, please comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this tale travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to a dusty frontier town and a man who thought he knew exactly what he wanted. The spring of 1876 arrived in Redwater Crossing the way it always did, with mud thick enough to swallow a wagon wheel and wine that carried equal parts promise and dust. The town sat in the crook of 2 rivers, prosperous enough to have brick buildings along Main Street, but rough enough that most men still settled disputes with fists or iron. It was the kind of place where a man could reinvent himself if he had the grit, or disappear entirely if he didn't. Noah Briggs rode in on a borrowed mare with everything he owned tied behind his saddle. 28 years old, lean as a whip from too many missed meals, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. His clothes were clean but threadbare, patched at the knees and elbows with the careful stitches of a man who'd learned to make do. He had $43 in his pocket, a piece of land nobody wanted 15 miles outside town, and the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been told his whole life that he didn't quite measure up. The annual Bride Fair had drawn folks from 50 miles in every direction. Banners stretched across Main Street, and the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air. Young women in their finest dresses promenaded under parasols while their fathers stood in tight clusters, sizing up potential sons-in-law with the same critical eye they'd use on livestock. It was commerce dressed up as romance, practical as a horse trade, and just as coldly negotiated. Noah hitched his mare outside the general store and stepped onto the boardwalk, brushing dust from his shirt. He'd come for supplies, not spectacle, but the crowd flowing toward the town square pulled him along like a current. "Make way! Marshal's coming through!" The sea of bodies parted, and Noah found himself pressed against a storefront as Marshal Jed Crow rode past on a gray gelding. Crow was a big man in his 50s, thick through the chest and middle, with a silver star pinned to his vest and an expression that suggested he found the world slightly beneath his standards. Behind him, on a small pinto, rode a vision that made Noah's breath catch: Rosalind Crow. He'd heard about her the way men hear about legends, whispered in bunkhouses and saloons, described in terms usually reserved for saints or expensive horses. Seeing her in person, Noah understood the poetry. She was perhaps 22, with honey-colored hair arranged in perfect curls beneath a cream-colored hat. Her dress was pale blue silk that probably cost more than Noah had earned in 6 months, and she sat her horse with the casual grace of someone who'd never doubted she belonged exactly where she was. When she smiled at the crowd, Noah felt something twist in his chest. Not just desire, though there was that, but something deeper and more desperate. She represented everything he'd been denied: beauty, ease, acceptance, a place in the world that wasn't constantly questioned. "Now that's a woman," the man next to Noah said with reverent appreciation. "Prettiest thing in the territory, and smart too, I hear. Speaks French." Noah said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He'd been nobody his entire life. The son of a drifter who died owing money, raised by an uncle who made sure he never forgot he was charity. He'd worked other men's ranches, slept in other men's bunkhouses, and watched lesser men claim the prizes he'd been told were beyond his reach. Rosalind Crow, untouchable and perfect, seemed like the culmination of everything he'd ever wanted and never had. The crowd surged into the square, and Noah let himself be carried along. A wooden platform had been erected in the center, decorated with ribbons and spring flowers that were already wilting in the heat. Marshal Crow dismounted and helped his daughter down with exaggerated care, and Noah noticed how she took her father's arm, how she smiled up at him with practiced sweetness. Crow raised his hands for silence, and the crowd gradually quieted. Friends and neighbors, he began, his voice carrying easily across the square. Another year, another fair. I see fathers trying to marry off their daughters, and young bucks trying to prove they're worth marrying. Same as always. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Noah shifted his weight, wondering why he was still standing here when he had fence posts to buy. But this year, Crow continued, his eyes glinting with something that might have been humor or malice. Noah couldn't tell which. I'm throwing my hat in the ring. Or rather, I'm throwing my daughter's hat in the ring. The crowd went still. Rosalind's smile never wavered, but Noah saw her grip tighten slightly on her father's arm. As you all know, Crow said, I own a black stallion. 4 years old, strong as the devil, and twice as mean. Killed a man in Kansas before I bought him, and he sent 3 of my best hands to the doctor since I brought him home. Beautiful animal, but vicious. Can't be broken, can't be sold, can't be shot because he's worth more than most of your houses. Just stands in his corral eating my hay and hating the world. Noah felt the first stirring of interest. He'd worked with difficult horses before, knew the satisfaction of earning trust from something wild. So here's my proposition, Crow said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register that somehow still carried. Any man, and I mean any man, regardless of station or family or how much land his daddy left him, who can tame that stallion, ride him calm through the square in 2 weeks' time, can claim my prettiest daughter's hand in marriage. The crowd erupted. Men shouted questions. Women gasped, and Rosalind stood perfectly still, her smile fixed like a mask. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was the chance he'd been waiting for his entire life, not just to prove he was as good as any man, but to claim something beautiful and valuable, to finally be chosen instead of overlooked. There's conditions, Crow continued once the noise died down. You've got 2 weeks starting tomorrow. You work the horse at my ranch under my supervision. You break him your way, but you break him proper. No drugs, no cruelty that leaves marks, nothing that damages his value. And on Judgment Day, you ride him through this square, calm as a lady's mount, or you walk away with nothing. Only one man gets to try at a time, and if you fail, you're done. No second chances. A man near the front called out, "What if more than one man tames him?" First one to ride him through this square wins, Crow said. But gentlemen, let's be realistic. Nobody's taming that horse. I'm offering a fantasy, not a guarantee. Still, if one of you is good enough, brave enough, or lucky enough, he gestured to Rosalind, who smiled brilliantly at the crowd, as if this was exactly what she wanted. My daughter comes with a dowry of $2,000, a house in town, and the respect of being a crow. Not a bad prize for 2 weeks' work. The crowd pressed forward, men shouting that they'd try first. They'd show the marshal what they could do. Noah stood frozen, his mind racing. 2 weeks. One chance. A black stallion everyone said was untamable, and a woman who looked like every dream he'd ever had of belonging somewhere that mattered. He pushed through the crowd before he could second-guess himself. "I'll try," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I'll be your first." Crow turned, his gaze sliding over Noah with the kind of assessment that took in worn boots and patched elbows in a single glance. For a moment, Noah was certain the marshal would laugh him off the platform, tell him to come back when he had something to offer, besides desperation and calloused hands. But Crow smiled slowly. "And you are?" "Noah Briggs. I've got a piece of land 15 miles west near the Mormon settlement." "That scrub property by Salt Creek?" someone in the crowd called out. "That's barely a ranch, Briggs." Heat flooded Noah's face, but he kept his eyes on Crow. "It's mine. Clear title. And I know horses." "Every cowboy knows horses," Crow said, but there was something calculating in his expression now. "What makes you think you can do what 3 experienced hands couldn't?" "Because I've got nothing to lose and everything to gain," Noah said bluntly. "That makes a man focused." The crowd laughed, but it wasn't entirely unkind. Crow studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Briggs, you start tomorrow at dawn. My ranch is 3 miles north on the road to Silver Springs. You can't miss it. Bring your own gear and your own courage. You'll need both." Noah nodded once, not trusting himself to speak, and turned to push back through the crowd. He'd done it. He'd committed himself in front of the whole town to either triumph or humiliation, with no middle ground. His hands were shaking slightly as he headed back toward his mare, and he barely registered the sounds of other men volunteering, each one probably more qualified and certainly better funded than he was. "That's the scrub rancher," he heard someone mutter as he passed. "Got that worthless Salt Creek property cheap because nobody else wanted it. Thinks he can land a crow?" "Marshall's just entertaining himself," another voice responded. "He knows nobody's taming that horse. This whole thing's a show." Noah climbed onto his borrowed mare and urged her into a trot, needing to put distance between himself and the voices that confirmed everything he'd ever feared about himself. But underneath the shame burned something fiercer, determination. He would tame that stallion. He would ride it through the square. He would claim Rosalind Crowe and the life she represented, and every person who'd ever looked through him like he was nothing would have to acknowledge that Noah Briggs had become somebody worth seeing. He made the 15-mile ride back to his property in a daze, barely noticing the spring landscape greening around him. His ranch, if the broken-down cabin and few acres of decent grazing could be called such, sat in a shallow valley with Salt Creek running along the eastern boundary. The land was cheap because the water was alkaline and the nearest neighbors were 5 miles in any direction, but it was his. He'd saved every penny from 5 years of ranch work to buy it, had rebuilt the cabin himself, and was slowly building a small herd of decent horses he hoped to sell for breeding stock. It wasn't much. It would never be the kind of spread that impressed people, but it was a start, and if he could win Rosalind Crowe, it would be enough. He barely slept that night, running through every horse-breaking technique he'd ever learned, every bit of wisdom from every old cowboy who'd taken pity on the orphan kid and taught him their trade. He was up before dawn, washing in the cold creek and putting on his lease-patched shirt, his hands steady now that he had a task in front of him. The ride to the Crow Ranch took just under an hour. The property was everything Noah's wasn't, prosperous, established, with a big 2-story house painted white, a substantial barn, and corrals that spoke of money and permanence. Hands were already moving around the property, feeding horses and mucking stalls, and they looked up as Noah rode in with expressions that ranged from curious to pitying. Marshall Crowe stood near the largest corral, smoking a cigar and looking entirely too pleased with himself. In the corral behind him, Noah got his first glimpse of the black stallion. The horse was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. 17 hands if he was an inch, solid black except for a small white star on his forehead, with the kind of powerful build that suggested he could run all day and still have the strength to kill you at sunset. His ears were pinned back flat against his skull, and even from 30 feet away Noah could see the rolling whites of his eyes. The stallion was pacing the fence line like a caged cougar, occasionally slamming his shoulder against the rails hard enough to make them shudder. "Beautiful, isn't he?" Crowe said as Noah dismounted. "Best lines in the territory. His sire won races from here to California, and his dam was legendary for her spirit. This boy got all of it, the speed, the strength, the heart, and the temper." "What's his name?" Noah asked, unable to look away from the horse. "Haven't named him. Seemed pointless to name something that's probably going to kill someone." Crowe drew on his cigar and exhaled slowly. "Your funeral, Briggs. My men will be nearby if he tries to stomp you to death, but don't expect them to risk their necks saving yours. You're the one who volunteered for this stupidity." Noah nodded slowly, assessing the situation. The stallion had been broken at some point. There were rope scars on his neck and flanks that told a story of rough handling, probably violence. Someone had tried to force this animal into submission and had only succeeded in teaching him that humans meant pain. That was useful information, actually. It meant the horse wasn't naturally vicious, just defensive. "I'll need a couple of hours just to let him get used to me," Noah said. "I won't push him today." Crowe laughed, short and sharp. "Whatever you say, cowboy. Clock's ticking, though. You've got 14 days now." Noah spent that first morning doing exactly what he'd promised. Nothing. He pulled up a section of fence near the corral and sat on the top rail, close enough that the stallion could see him, but far enough that he wasn't an immediate threat. The horse eyed him with suspicion, occasionally charging the fence and stopping just short, testing whether this human would flinch. Noah didn't. He just sat there, letting the sun move across the sky, occasionally talking in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular. "You're not so different from me," he told the horse as noon approached. "Everybody thinks you're dangerous, but really you're just scared. Somebody hurt you once, and you decided you wouldn't let it happen again. I understand that. The stallion snorted and tossed his head, but his ears swiveled forward, listening. By midday, Noah's backside was numb from sitting on the fence rail, and his throat was dry from talking. He was about to climb down and take a break when movement near the barn caught his eye. A woman was walking toward the corral, carrying a bucket. She was heavy, there was no delicate way to put it, with a solid, sturdy build that suggested strength rather than softness. Her dress was plain brown homespun, practical and work-worn, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid that was coming loose at the edges. Sweat stained her dress at the back and underarms despite the relatively cool morning, and she walked with the no-nonsense stride of someone who had work to do and no time for foolishness. She didn't look at Noah as she approached the corral. She simply opened the gate. The stallion immediately retreated to the far side, snorting warnings, and walked calmly into the enclosure. She set the bucket down near the center and stepped back, then turned and walked out again, latching the gate behind her. Only then did she glance up at Noah, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. She had her father's strong features, but where Crow's face was set in perpetual judgment, hers was calm, almost neutral. Her eyes were dark brown, intelligent, and assessing. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way Rosalind was, but there was something arresting about her steady gaze. "You're the drifter who thinks he can win my sister," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to tame that horse," Noah said, not quite answering. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Because that's the deal. Tame the horse, win—" He stopped himself before saying, "win the prize," realizing how it would sound. "Win Rosaline," the woman finished for him, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. Every man in 3 counties wants to win Rosaline. She's beautiful, she's cultured, she's the perfect ornament for an ambitious man's home. There was an edge to her words that Noah couldn't quite interpret. He studied her more carefully, trying to place her. She was clearly a Crow. She had the same strong build as the marshal, the same dark coloring, but he hadn't seen her at the bride fair. "I don't think we've met," he said carefully. "No, I stay out of town when I can help it. Less entertainment for the gossips that way." She nodded toward the bucket she'd left in the corral. "That's grain mixed with molasses. He'll eat it once you're gone, but he won't touch it while anyone's watching. He's proud that way." "You know him," Noah said, surprise and relief flooding through him. "You know this horse." "Better than anyone else on this ranch." She crossed her arms, leaning against the corral fence a few feet from where Noah sat. "I'm the one who feeds him. Have been for 4 months." "Then you can help me." "I haven't decided if I want to help you," she interrupted. "You're just another cowboy trying to win something pretty. What makes you different from the others?" Noah felt anger flash hot in his chest. "I'm not just another cowboy. I've got my own land, your own scrub property that barely supports a dozen horses," she said calmly. "Yes, I heard about it. Everyone's heard about it. That's the problem with small towns. There are no secrets, just versions of the truth people like better than others." She pushed off from the fence and started to walk away, and Noah felt opportunity slipping through his fingers like water. "Wait," he called. "Please, you're right. I want to win your sister because she's beautiful, and because marrying a Crow would mean I'm somebody in this territory instead of nobody. That's the truth, and it's not noble, but it's honest. And yes, I've got nothing but worn-out land and $43 to my name. But I'm a good horseman, I'm patient, I'm willing to learn. And if you know this stallion, if you know how to reach him, then teaching me is better than watching me fail and having this whole thing start over with someone who might hurt him." She stopped walking and turned back, studying him with that same unsettling calm. The stallion had moved closer to the bucket now, still watching them, but less agitated. "His name is Midnight," she said finally. "I named him even though my father said it was pointless. He's 4 years old. He was broken rough in Kansas, ropes and hobbles and beatings, until he learned to associate people with pain. The man who owned him tried to run him in races, but Midnight killed him, kicked him in the chest, and kept kicking until there was nothing left to kick. Self-defense, in my opinion. But the horse got labeled as a killer. My father bought him cheap, thinking he could make money breeding him or selling him once he was properly trained. But every hand who tried to work with him ended up hurt, and my father got the bright idea to turn the problem into entertainment. The bride fair was his solution. Make it a contest. Let some foolish young men risk their necks for free, and if by some miracle one of them succeeds, he marries off Rosalind and doesn't have to pay some suitable young man's family to take her. Noah absorbed this, his mind working. You don't think much of your sister. I love my sister, she said quietly. But I know her. She's been raised to be beautiful and charming and utterly useless at anything requiring actual work. She'll make some ambitious man a perfect wife, pretty, decorative, able to host dinners and make conversation. She'll give him pretty children and manage his household and never once question whether there's more to life than being admired. If that's what you want, then by all means tame Midnight and claim your prize. What's your name? Noah asked, though he was already beginning to suspect. Lila Crow, she said, meeting his eyes directly. The daughter my father doesn't show off at bride fairs. The one who feeds the killer horse and manages the breeding records and knows which mares are coming into season before the stable hands do. The one who actually works on this ranch instead of sitting in the parlor learning French. The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Noah looked at her more carefully, seeing past the plain dress and work-roughened hands to something else. Competence, intelligence, a kind of quiet strength that Rosalind's ornamental beauty lacked entirely. Will you help me? He asked again. Lila looked at him for a long moment, then at Midnight, who had finally approached the bucket and was eating the grain mixture with suspicious, quick bites, ready to bolt at any threat. Tomorrow at dawn, she said finally. Don't try to work with him today beyond what you're already doing. Just sit there. Let him get used to your presence. Tomorrow I'll teach you the first real lesson. Never approach Midnight from the left side. He was beaten from the left, and he'll never trust it. Everything from the right, always. And if you ignore that advice, if you think you know better, then you can learn the hard way like everyone else did. She walked away before Noah could respond, her plain dress blending into the barn's shadow as she disappeared inside. Noah sat on the fence rail for another hour, watching Midnight finish the grain and then pace the perimeter again, a little less agitated now, a little more thoughtful. The next morning Noah arrived before dawn, and Lila was already there, leaning against the corral fence with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without comment, and they stood in companionable silence as the sky lightened and Midnight emerged from the rough shelter at the back of the corral. Watch, Lila said softly. She climbed over the fence with surprising grace for her size and walked into the corral, moving slowly but without fear. Midnight's ears went back, but he didn't charge. Lila walked to the right side of the enclosure and waited, and after a moment the stallion approached her, extending his muzzle to sniff her outstretched hand. She murmured something too quiet for Noah to hear, then touched the horse's shoulder gently. Midnight allowed it for a few seconds before stepping back, and Lila calmly walked out of the corral again. He knows you, Noah said, amazed. He trusts you. He tolerates me, Lila corrected. There's a difference. I feed him, I speak quietly, I never come from the left, and I never ask more than he's willing to give. That's not trust. That's an agreement between 2 creatures who've both been hurt and don't want to be hurt again. She handed Noah a sugar cube. Your turn. Walk to the right side of the fence. Don't go in yet. Just hold this out and let him come to you if he wants. Don't call him. Don't make demands. Just offer. Noah did as instructed, feeling foolish standing there with his arms stretched through the fence rails holding a sugar cube. Midnight eyed him from across the corral, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Minutes passed. Noah's arms started to ache. Patience, Lila said from behind him. He's deciding if you're worth the risk. Finally, slowly, Midnight approached. He stopped just out of reach, studying Noah with one dark eye. Then he stretched his neck out, lips carefully taking the sugar cube from Noah's palm with a delicacy that seemed impossible for an animal so large and supposedly vicious. Good, Lila said quietly. Now step back. That's enough for today. That's it? Noah turned to look at her, frustrated. I've got less than 2 weeks. I can't spend every day feeding him sugar and waiting. You can and you will, Lila said firmly. You push him before he's ready, he'll put you in the dirt and we'll be scraping up pieces of Noah Briggs with a shovel. This is how it's done, slow, steady, building on small victories. Tomorrow you'll try the same thing but from a foot closer. The day after that, you'll try reaching over the fence to touch his shoulder. We work at his pace, not yours. Noah wanted to argue, but He remembered the rope scars on Midnight's flanks, the way the horse's eyes had looked when he first arrived, wild with old pain and newer rage. Lila was right. This wasn't about domination. It was about negotiation. "All right," he said. "We do it your way." Over the next week, Noah learned more about horses than he'd learned in his entire life. Lila had an almost supernatural understanding of Midnight's moods and triggers. She taught Noah to read the smallest shifts in the stallion's ears, the tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing changed when he was nervous versus when he was about to bolt, versus when he was simply testing boundaries. They worked in silence mostly, but sometimes Lila would talk, her voice low and steady. She'd tell him about different horses she'd trained, about the mare who'd been terrified of shadows and the gelding who'd learned to unlatch gates. She never talked about herself, never mentioned Rosalind or her father, or the fact that she'd been hidden away from the bride fair like a shameful secret. Noah tried to work with Midnight alone one afternoon when Lila was busy in the barn. He approached from the right side like she'd taught him, moved slowly, kept his voice low. But he got impatient, reached out to touch Midnight's neck before the horse was ready, and got slammed against the fence so hard he saw stars. He was picking splinters out of his shoulder when Lila found him. "I told you," was all she said, but her hands were gentle as she helped him clean the scrapes. "You're still thinking like a cowboy who needs to break a horse. You need to think like someone who wants to earn a partner." "I don't have time for philosophy," Noah said, more sharply than he intended. "I've got 6 days left and I still can't get a halter on him." "Then you'll fail," Lila said simply, "and my father will laugh and Rosalind will marry someone else, and Midnight will still be standing in this corral hating the world. Is that what you want?" "No." Noah pressed his palms against his eyes, exhausted and hurting and terrified that he'd committed himself to something impossible. "I want to win. I want to prove I'm good enough. I want to stop being the man people look through instead of at." "Then stop trying to force it," Lila said. "Stop thinking about what you want and start thinking about what he needs. He needs to know you won't hurt him. He needs to see you as something other than another person who wants to break his spirit. Show him that, and he'll give you everything." That evening, Noah rode back to his property feeling bruised in body and spirit. He lay in his narrow bunk staring at the ceiling, running through everything Lila had taught him, everything he was doing wrong. He thought about Rosalind, tried to conjure that initial burst of desire and determination he'd felt at the bride fair. But the image that came to mind instead was Lila standing in the corral with Midnight, fearless and calm, speaking to a dangerous animal like he was something worth understanding instead of conquering. The next morning, he arrived at the Crow Ranch with a new determination, not to dominate Midnight, but to understand him. Lila was waiting with her usual coffee, and they worked through the morning routine. Grain mixed with molasses, sugar cubes from increasingly close distances, patience when Midnight spooked at a sudden sound or movement. "Tell me about Rosalind, Swook," Noah said during a break, leaning against the fence while Midnight dozed in the sun on the far side of the corral. "You said she's been raised to be an ornament. What does that mean?" Lila didn't answer immediately. She was watching Midnight, but Noah could see her shoulders tense slightly. "It means my father had 2 daughters," she said finally. "One was beautiful and small and delicate, like our mother was. The other was big and plain and too much like him, strong and stubborn and useful. He decided early which one would be his prize and which one would be his workhorse. Rosalind got French lessons and piano and dresses from San Francisco. I got the breeding records and the difficult horses and the knowledge that I'd never be worth parading through the square." There was no self-pity in her voice, just a flat recitation of facts. Noah felt something twist in his chest. Not pity exactly, but recognition. He understood what it was like to be sorted into a category and told that was all you'd ever be worth. "That's not fair," he said. "Life rarely is," Lila replied, "but I make the best of it. I'm good with horses, better than any hand my father employs. When he dies, someone will probably buy this ranch, and I'll be out of a place to live, because spinster daughters aren't part of property transfers. But until then, I do the work I'm good at and try not to want things I can't have." "Like what?" Noah asked, genuinely curious. Lila looked at him then, really looked at him, and Noah saw something in her eyes. Loneliness, maybe, or longing, or the ghost of dreams she'd learned not to speak aloud. Like being seen, she said quietly, like mattering to someone beyond my utility, like being chosen instead of settled for. She straightened, breaking the moment. But that's not your concern. You're here to win Rosalind, and I'm here to help you do it. Let's get back to work. They worked until noon, and for the first time Noah managed to slip a halter over Midnight's head without the stallion bolting. It was progress, real progress, and Lila actually smiled, a quick flash of warmth that transformed her face entirely. "See?" she said. "Patience pays off. By Judgment Day, you'll have him eating out of your hand, metaphorically speaking." Noah wanted to respond, to thank her properly, but movement near the house caught his attention. Rosalind had emerged onto the porch, looking like something from a painting in a pale pink dress, with her hair arranged in elaborate curls. She waved in their direction, a graceful gesture that could have meant anything, and Noah found himself waving back automatically. When he looked back at Lila, her expression had shuddered again, all that momentary warmth gone. "That's your prize," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Beautiful enough to make men forget what matters. You should go talk to her. Make sure she knows you're serious about this." "I'm serious about taming Midnight," Noah said, not quite sure why he was clarifying. "That's the deal." "The deal is you tame the horse and claim the girl," Lila corrected. "Same thing in my father's eyes. A transaction. You get something pretty to look at, and he gets a son-in-law desperate enough to work hard and grateful enough to stay loyal. Everyone wins except the horse and the daughter, who don't get any say in the matter." She walked away before Noah could respond, heading toward the barn with that same no-nonsense stride. Noah looked back at the porch, but Rosalind had gone inside. He touched his shoulder where Midnight had slammed him into the fence, already bruising deep purple, and wondered why winning was starting to feel more complicated than he'd expected. That night, lying in his bunk again, Noah tried to sort through his tangled thoughts. He pictured standing in the square with Rosalind beside him, imagined the way people would look at them, at him, finally, with respect instead of dismissal. That was what he wanted, wasn't it? To be someone worth noticing, to have something beautiful on his arm that proved his value. But when he closed his eyes, the image that came to mind was Lila standing in the corral with Midnight, strong and unafraid, teaching Noah how to see what everyone else had missed. The horse wasn't a monster. He was just scared and scarred and waiting for someone to prove that not all humans brought pain. 5 days before Judgment Day, Noah arrived at the Crow Ranch before dawn as usual, but Lila wasn't there. He waited, pacing near the corral while Midnight watched him with suspicious interest. The sun rose higher, and finally Marshal Crow emerged from the house, smoking his morning cigar. "Looking for my daughter?" he asked, amusement coloring his voice. "Which one, I wonder?" Noah felt heat climb his neck. "Lila, she's been helping me with the horse." "Has she now?" Crow drew on his cigar thoughtfully. "That's interesting. I wondered why you were making such progress. Most men would have given up by now, but here you are, not dead yet. Lila's got a gift with difficult animals. Always has. Pity she's not pretty enough to make that gift worth marrying." The casual cruelty of the statement made Noah's hands clench into fists. "Where is she?" "Gone to town for supplies. She'll be back by afternoon." Crow studied Noah with those calculating eyes. "You're getting attached to her help. That's dangerous, Briggs. She's teaching you well because she knows you'll take her sister off this ranch. Don't mistake utility for affection. Lila understands her place in this family, even if you don't." Noah wanted to argue, to defend Lila against her own father's dismissal, but Crow was already walking away. Noah turned back to the corral, where Midnight stood at the fence, head lifted, ears forward, waiting. "All right," Noah said quietly. "Let's see if I learned anything without her supervision." He climbed into the corral slowly, moving to the right side as always. Midnight tracked his movement, but didn't bolt. Noah kept his breathing steady, his movements deliberate. He'd brought sugar cubes, and he offered one now, his hand steady even though his heart was racing. Midnight approached, took the sugar, and allowed Noah to touch his shoulder. Progress. Real, tangible progress. "You're a good boy," Noah murmured. "Scared and angry, but good underneath. Someone hurt you, but that doesn't mean everyone will. Lila taught me that. She sees you, really sees you, not what everyone says you are. The stallion's ear swiveled toward him, listening. Noah stayed there for an hour, just standing beside Midnight, occasionally offering treats, building trust one moment at a time. By the time Lila returned that afternoon, Noah had managed to lead Midnight around the corral with just a halter and lead rope. No fighting, no dramatics, just steady cooperation. Lila stopped at the fence, her arms full of supply packages, and Noah saw genuine surprise cross her face. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it without me." "You taught me well," Noah said, and found he meant it more than he expected. "Everything I know about this horse, I learned from you." Something flickered in Lila's expression, pleasure, maybe, or validation, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by her usual calm. "Good, because you've got 4 days to go from leading him around a corral to riding him through town. That's where most men fail. Midnight will tolerate a halter, but a saddle is a different matter entirely." The next 3 days were brutal. Midnight would accept a blanket on his back, but the moment Noah tried to introduce a saddle, the stallion transformed back into the raging demon that had earned his reputation. He bucked, he spun, he slammed his body against the fence with Noah barely dodging to safety. "He thinks the saddle is a trap," Lila explained after the third failed attempt left Noah limping. "Someone saddled him rough in Kansas, probably cinched it too tight, or didn't let him adjust. He's associating the saddle with pain and constraint." "So what do I do?" Noah asked, exhausted and running out of time. Judgment Day was tomorrow. "You show him it doesn't have to hurt," Lila said simply. She retrieved the saddle from where Noah had abandoned it and walked into the corral. Midnight immediately retreated to the far side, snorting warnings. Lila ignored him and sat down on the ground with the saddle, running her hands over the leather, adjusting the stirrups, loosening the girth. "Come here," she called to Midnight, not demanding, just inviting. "Come see." The stallion stayed where he was for several minutes, but eventually curiosity won. He approached cautiously, sniffing the air, every muscle tensed to flee. Lila kept her movements small and unthreatening, and when Midnight came close enough, she held up a corner of the saddle blanket. "See? Just wool. Nothing that bites or traps, just something to keep the leather from rubbing." Over the next hour, Lila let Midnight investigate every part of the saddle: the blanket, the leather, the stirrups, even the girth. She narrated each piece, explaining its purpose in that same calm voice she used for everything. Noah watched in amazement as the stallion's fear gradually transformed into cautious interest. "Now you try," Lila said finally, gesturing Noah into the corral. With Lila supervising, Noah approached Midnight from the right side, the blanket held loosely in his hands. The stallion watched him but didn't bolt. Noah laid the blanket across Midnight's back, gentle and careful, and the horse allowed it. Lila talked him through adding the saddle, showed him how to tighten the girth in stages so Midnight could adjust, how to praise each moment of cooperation. By sunset, Midnight stood in the corral fully saddled, tense but not panicking. Noah wanted to try mounting, but Lila stopped him. "Not tonight. Let him stand with it. Get used to the weight. Tomorrow morning you'll mount. One chance. If you rush him now and he throws you, you won't have time to rebuild the trust before Judgment Day." Noah nodded, too tired and too grateful to argue. He unsaddled Midnight carefully, praising the horse with every buckle undone, and watched as the stallion rolled in the dust, scratching his back where the saddle had rested. "Thank you," Noah said to Lila as they walked back toward the barn. "For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "You're welcome," Lila said, but her voice was distant, almost sad. "You'll ride him tomorrow, and the next day you'll win Rosalind, and you'll build the life you wanted. I'm glad I could help." Something about the finality in her tone bothered Noah, but before he could examine the feeling, Marshal Crow appeared from the house. "Tomorrow's the day, Briggs," he called. "You ready to make a fool of yourself in front of the whole town, or do you think you'll actually pull this off?" "I'll pull it off," Noah said, with more confidence than he felt. Crow smiled that calculating smile. "We'll see. Noon tomorrow in the square. Don't be late, and don't disappoint me. I've got a lot of money riding on this being entertaining, one way or another." Noah rode home that night with his mind spinning. Judgment Day tomorrow. One ride through the square and everything would change. He'd claim Rosalind Crowe. He'd have the respect and validation he'd chased his entire life, and he'd finally prove that Noah Briggs was somebody worth noticing. He should have been ecstatic. Instead, he felt something closer to dread, though he couldn't explain why. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for public humiliation or public triumph, depending on which way things went. Noah arrived at the Crow Ranch an hour before they needed to leave, and Lila was already there with Midnight, who looked surprisingly calm despite the crowd gathering in town. "He knows something's different," Lila said as Noah approached. "Horses are smart that way. But I've been talking to him, preparing him. The crowd noise will spook him. There's no avoiding that. But if you stay calm, if you remember everything we've practiced, he'll follow your lead." They saddled Midnight together, a careful dance of movements they'd practiced a dozen times. The stallion accepted the tack with only minor resistance, and when Noah swung into the saddle, Midnight's ears flicked back, but he didn't buck. "That's good," Lila breathed, her hand on Midnight's neck, steadying him. "That's so good. See? You're not a demon, are you? Just a horse who needed someone to understand." Noah walked Midnight around the corral, testing the stallion's responses. They moved together smoothly, Midnight's gait powerful but controlled. When Noah asked for a trot, the horse responded. When he asked for a stop, Midnight halted cleanly. "You did it," Lila said, and her smile was radiant and heartbreaking all at once. "You actually did it. Come on, let's get you to town before my father has a chance to realize he's about to lose his bet with himself." They rode together toward Redwater Crossing, Noah on Midnight, Lila on her Plain Bay mare, and Marshal Crowe following on his gray gelding with an expression that suggested he still expected this whole thing to end in disaster. The closer they got to town, the tighter Noah's stomach clenched. He could hear the crowd before he saw them. Hundreds of people packed into the square, waiting to see if the drifter rancher would triumph or be crushed. Lila rode close beside him, her presence steady and calming. "Remember," she said quietly, "the crowd will make noise. Midnight will be frightened. But you're not asking him to be brave. You're being brave for him. Show him there's nothing to fear, and he'll believe you." They crested the final hill, and the town spread below them, the square packed with more people than Noah had ever seen in one place. His hands tightened on the reins, and immediately Midnight felt the tension, sidestepping nervously. "Easy," Noah murmured, forcing his hands to relax. "We've got this. You and me." They entered the square, and the crowd erupted in noise, cheering, shouting, some whistling. Midnight's ears pinned back and his body coiled with the instinct to bolt. Noah felt the power in the horse beneath him, knew that one wrong move and this would end with him in the dirt and Midnight running wild through town. But he remembered what Lila taught him. He kept his breathing steady, his hands light on the reins. He leaned forward slightly and spoke low words of encouragement that the crowd couldn't hear but Midnight could feel. "You're all right. I've got you. We're just walking. Nothing here will hurt you." Slowly, one step at a time, they moved through the square. Midnight's muscles were tense as steel cable, but he walked forward, trusting Noah to guide him through this frightening new world. The crowd pressed close, and Noah saw faces he recognized, cowboys who'd called him the scrub rancher, merchants who'd looked through him like he wasn't there, families who'd never invited him to their tables because he had nothing to offer in return. And then he saw Rosalind standing on the platform with her father, wearing a dress the color of spring sky, her expression perfect and practiced. She smiled at Noah, the smile of a woman who'd been told she was the prize and had accepted this as natural law. Beside her, Noah caught a glimpse of Lila, standing slightly behind, wearing the same plain brown dress she always wore, her face carefully neutral. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Noah saw something there. Pride, maybe, or sadness, or both tangled together. They completed the circuit of the square, Midnight walking calmly despite the noise, despite the chaos. As they approached the platform, Marshal Crowe stepped forward, his expression a complicated mix of annoyance and reluctant respect. "Well, I'll be damned," Crowe said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "The boy actually did it, tamed the untamable horse." He gestured dramatically toward the platform. "A deal's a deal, Briggs. You tamed my horse, so you can claim—" "Wait." The word came from behind Crowe, and Noah turned to see Lila stepping forward. Her face had lost all color, but her voice was steady. "Father," she said, "you said any man who tamed Midnight could claim your prettiest daughter. Not your most ornamental daughter, not your most marriageable daughter, your prettiest daughter." The crowd went silent, sensing drama better than any planned entertainment. Crow's expression darkened. "Lila, get back." "I'm your prettiest daughter," Lila said, and her voice didn't waver even as spots of color burned in her cheeks. "I know how the town sees me. I know what you and Rosalind think I'm worth. But I'm the one who made this possible. I taught Noah everything he knows about Midnight. I was the one in the corral every morning. I was the one who saw both of them, really saw them, when everyone else just saw a worthless drifter and a killer horse. So by your own bargain, Father, I'm claiming what I'm owed, acknowledgement that I exist, that I matter, that I'm more than your workhorse to be hidden away." The silence stretched so tight Noah thought it might snap. Marshal Crow looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and for just a moment Noah saw something flicker in the old man's eyes. Shame, maybe, or recognition. Then Crow's expression hardened again, and he laughed, a short, sharp bark of dismissal. "Nice try, girl, but we both know I meant Rosalind. Stop embarrassing yourself." He turned back to Noah, forcing joviality. "Come on up here, Briggs. Claim your bride like we agreed." Noah sat on Midnight, the leather reins in his hands, looking between Lila's flushed, determined face and Rosalind's perfect, untouchable beauty. He'd won. He'd done the impossible. Rosalind Crow was his for the taking, the house in town, the dowry, the status, everything he'd wanted. But as he looked at Lila, standing straight-backed despite her father's dismissal, brave in a way Rosalind had never had to be, Noah felt something shift inside his chest. She'd given him everything these past 2 weeks. Not just knowledge about horses, but a glimpse of what it meant to be truly seen, truly understood. She'd known exactly what he was chasing and why, had never judged him for his desperate hunger to matter, had simply helped him because she recognized the same hunger in herself. And he told himself he was doing this for Rosalind, for beauty and status and validation. But who had he talked to every morning? Who had he shared his fears and frustrations with? Whose steady presence had made even the hardest days feel manageable? The crowd was getting restless, waiting for Noah to dismount, to walk up those stairs and claim the prize everyone expected him to want. Noah's hands tightened on the reins again, and Midnight shifted beneath him, sensing his rider's turmoil. He looked at Lila one more time, really looked at her, and saw her as she was, strong and smart and infinitely braver than any person he'd ever met. She'd taught him to see Midnight not as a monster, but as a frightened animal deserving of understanding. And in doing so, she'd taught Noah to see himself the same way, not as worthless, but as worthy of being chosen for who he was, not what he might prove. The thing was, Noah realized with sudden, painful clarity, she deserved the same. She deserved to be chosen. Not settled for, not accepted as consolation, but genuinely chosen by someone who saw her value. And right now, in this moment, with the whole town watching and his dream standing on that platform in a sky blue dress, Noah had to decide who he was going to be. Noah dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the packed dirt of the square with a finality that seemed to echo in the hushed crowd. Midnight stood perfectly still beside him, no longer the demon horse everyone had feared, but a creature who'd learned to trust the man holding his reins. Noah handed those reins to a boy standing nearby, never taking his eyes off the platform where the Crow family waited. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him as he walked forward, each step deliberate. His heart hammered so hard he thought people might hear it, but his face remained calm. When he reached the platform stairs, Marshal Crow was grinning like a man who'd just won a bet he'd expected to lose. "Well done, Briggs," Crow said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've earned your prize. Come on up here and claim what's yours." Noah climbed the stairs, his worn boots looking shabby against the decorated wood. Rosalind stood to Crow's right, her beautiful face composed in that practiced smile, her hands folded demurely in front of her pale blue dress. She looked exactly like what she was. A perfectly crafted prize, beautiful and valuable and utterly untouchable in some fundamental way. Lila stood to her father's left, and the contrast was stark. Where Rosalind was delicate and adorned, Lila was solid and plain. Where Rosalind's expression was serene and confident, Lila's was shuttered and wary, like she was bracing herself for whatever came next. Her brown work dress had sweat stains under the arms, despite the cool morning, and her dark hair was escaping its braid in untidy wisps. She looked like a woman who'd spent the morning doing real work while her sister had been arranging curls. Noah stopped in front of Marshal Crow, close enough to see the calculation in the older man's eyes. This was all a game to Crow, Noah realized. The whole thing, the bride fair, the impossible horse, the public spectacle. It was entertainment for a man bored with his own prosperity, a way to assert dominance while appearing generous. So, Crow said, drawing out the word, you tamed the killer horse, rode him through my town calm as a lady's mount. I'm impressed, Briggs. Didn't think you had it in you. I had help, Noah said, his voice carrying across the square. He looked directly at Lila. Good help, the kind that sees what's really there instead of what everyone expects to see. Something flickered in Lila's eyes, surprise maybe, or hope, but Crow was already speaking again, his hand moving to Rosalind's shoulder. Well, a deal's a deal. You tamed my horse, so you get my— Your prettiest daughter, Noah interrupted. That was the exact wording. Any man who can tame the stallion can claim your prettiest daughter. Crow's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly. That's right, my prettiest daughter. His hand tightened on Rosalind's shoulder, making his meaning clear. No, Noah said quietly. Not her. The crowd's murmur rose like a wave. Rosalind's perfect composure cracked just slightly, confusion crossing her face. Crow's smile turned dangerous. What did you say? Noah took a breath. Knowing what he was about to do would either be the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done in his life. I said not her. Rosalind is beautiful. Nobody's disputing that. But pretty and prettiest aren't the same thing. You said prettiest. You didn't specify which kind of pretty you meant. Boy, you're testing my patience. There's pretty like a painting, Noah continued, his voice growing stronger. Beautiful to look at, but useless for anything real. And then there's pretty like a sunrise. Something that works, that matters, that makes the world function better just by existing. Your daughter Lila taught me more about horses in 2 weeks than I learned in 10 years of ranch work. She sees things nobody else sees. She's patient and smart and stronger than half the men in this town. That's pretty in a way that matters. That's the kind of pretty that builds something lasting. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Crow's face was turning an alarming shade of red, but before he could respond, Lila spoke. Stop, she said, her voice rough. Noah, just stop. Take Rosalind like everyone expects. Don't do this out of pity or gratitude or— It's not pity, Noah said, turning to face her fully. And it's not just gratitude, though God knows I'm grateful. It's recognition. You spent 2 weeks teaching me to see Midnight as more than a killer horse. Well, I'm finally seeing you as more than the hidden daughter. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lila Crow. You deserve to be chosen, not settled for, not accepted as consolation. Chosen. Lila's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke. You don't know what you're saying. You came here for Rosalind, for the status, the money, the life she represents. I came here because I was lonely and desperate, and thought winning something beautiful would make me worth something, Noah said. But I was wrong about what beauty means. I was wrong about what matters. And I'm asking you, not your father, not the town, you, if you'd consider marrying a stubborn fool who's finally learning to see what's right in front of him. For a long moment, Lila just stared at him. Then she looked at her father, at Rosalind, at the hundreds of faces watching this scene unfold. Noah saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. You'll regret it, she whispered. You'll wake up one day and see my sister walking through town with some other man, beautiful and perfect, and you'll regret choosing me. Maybe, Noah said honestly. Or maybe I'll wake up next to a woman who knows how to build something real, who isn't afraid of work or difficult truths, and I'll thank whatever luck brought me to that killer horse. He held out his hand. I'm not promising it'll be easy. I'm not promising I won't be an idiot sometimes. But I'm promising to choose you. Today. In front of everyone. Is that enough? Lila looked at his outstretched hand like it might be a trap. Then, slowly she reached out and took it. Her palm was rough with calluses, her grip firm and real. Yes, she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Yes, It's enough. Marshal Crowe exploded. Like hell it is. I said my prettiest daughter and I meant Rosalind. You can't just... You said any man who tames the horse can claim your prettiest daughter, Noah said, his hand still holding Lila's. You didn't specify. You wanted to make this whole thing a show, make it entertaining. Well, congratulations, Marshal. You got your show. But you don't get to change the rules now that you don't like the outcome. Crowe looked like he wanted to strike Noah, but he was trapped by his own words and the watching crowd. A merchant near the front called out, "The boy's right, Jed. You said prettiest daughter, didn't say which one you meant." "Course he meant Rosalind," someone else shouted. "Look at her." "Pretty is as pretty does," a woman's voice responded. "I've seen Lila Crowe work harder in one day than that pampered girl has worked in her whole life." The crowd began to argue among themselves, some supporting Noah's choice, others calling it ridiculous. Through it all, Crowe stood with his face purple with rage, and Rosalind looked between her father and sister with an expression of genuine bewilderment, as if she couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose Lila when she was standing right there. Finally, a voice cut through the chaos. "Marshal Crowe." Everyone turned to see Judge Whitmore pushing through the crowd, his weathered face stern. The judge was the closest thing Redwater Crossing had to final authority beyond the marshal himself, and even Crowe couldn't dismiss him. "You made a public bargain," Whitmore said as he climbed onto the platform, "in front of witnesses. This young man fulfilled his end, tamed your horse, rode him through town. Your exact words were, 'Any man who can tame that stallion can claim my prettiest daughter's hand in marriage.' You didn't specify Rosalind. That's sloppy wording, Jed, and you know it. The boy chose Lila. She accepted. That's a valid contract, and if you try to back out now, you'll make yourself a liar in front of the whole territory." Crowe's jaw worked, his eyes darting between the judge, Noah, and his two daughters. Noah could see the calculation happening, weighing his pride against his reputation, his anger against the political cost of breaking his word. "Fine," Crowe spat finally. "You want Lila, Briggs? You can have her. But don't come crying to me when you wake up next to that and wish you'd made a different choice." He jabbed a finger at Lila, who flinched as if she'd been struck. "The deal was marriage and a dowry. You're getting half the dowry, 1,000 instead of 2, and no house in town. Lila's never been worth the full price." "Father," Rosalind started, but Crowe cut her off with a sharp gesture. "This circus is over. Whitmore, you're a judge. Marry them right now, today, so this ridiculous business is done." Judge Whitmore looked at Noah and Lila with something that might have been sympathy. "You both sure about this? Marriage performed in haste." "I'm sure," Noah said. Lila's voice was barely audible. "Yes." "Then let's get it done," Whitmore said with a sigh. What should have been a joyful occasion felt more like a funeral. The crowd pressed closer as Whitmore pulled out a small Bible he always carried and began the abbreviated ceremony. Noah stood holding Lila's hand, acutely aware of how cold her fingers felt despite the warm day, how rigid her posture was. When it came time for the vows, she spoke her responses in a mechanical monotone that made Noah's chest ache. "Do you, Lila Marie Crowe, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Do you, Noah James Briggs, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may, well, you may kiss if you want, I suppose." Noah looked at Lila, at her tight expression and rigid shoulders, and knew kissing her in front of this crowd would feel like a violation. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and said, "We'll save that for private." If anything, Lila looked relieved. They turned to face the crowd, and the applause was scattered and uncertain. Some people were cheering, some were silent, and some were openly laughing. At the spectacle, at Crowe's fury, at the idea of the drifter rancher ending up with the wrong daughter. "Well," someone called out, "that's one way to get a wife." More laughter, and Noah felt Lila's hand tremble in his. He wanted to say something, to defend her, but Crowe was already pushing past them, grabbing Rosalind's arm and practically dragging her off the platform. The crowd began to disperse, still chattering excitedly about the drama they'd witnessed. Judge Whitmore pulled Noah aside while Lila stood frozen on the platform. "I've got the marriage certificate to file. You're legal as of now, husband and wife in the eyes of the law." I'll have someone bring it out to your property once it's recorded. And son, he lowered his voice, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen a man do. I hope for both your sakes it was brave. Noah nodded, his throat tight, and turned back to where Lila stood. She was staring at Midnight, who was calmly standing where Noah had left him, totally unconcerned with the human drama unfolding around him. We should go, Noah said quietly. Get you away from all these people. I need to get my things, Lila said, her voice flat. From the ranch. They rode back to the Crow property in silence. Lila on her bay mare, Noah on Midnight. When they arrived, the ranch felt different somehow, unwelcoming. Crow's horse was already in the barn, but the marshal himself was nowhere to be seen. Lila dismounted and walked toward the house with rigid steps. I'll wait here, Noah said, not wanting to intrude on whatever confrontation might be waiting inside. Lila nodded and disappeared through the door. Noah stood in the yard holding Midnight's reins, wondering what the hell he'd just done. He'd thrown away his chance at Rosalind, at the life of status and comfort he'd dreamed about. And for what? A woman who'd helped him out of utility, who'd made it clear she thought he'd regret his choice, who looked at him with gratitude but not affection. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. He was married, to a woman he'd known for 2 weeks, a woman who was even now probably being berated by her father for being the wrong choice, the consolation prize, the daughter who wasn't worth the full dowry. 20 minutes later, Lila emerged with a worn canvas bag and a small trunk. Her face was blotchy, like she'd been crying, but her expression was composed. She said nothing as she tied her belongings to her mare's saddle with practiced efficiency. Lila, don't, she said, not looking at him. Please just don't. Let's just get to your ranch and figure out what happens next. They rode the 15 miles to Noah's property in oppressive silence. The sun was high overhead by the time they arrived, turning the little cabin in rough corrals into something that looked even more pathetic than usual. Noah saw Lila take in the shabby buildings, the limited acreage, the creek that ran alkaline and unreliable. He saw her face remain carefully neutral, and somehow that was worse than if she'd looked disappointed. It's not much, Noah said, dismounting and helping her down from her mare. But it's paid for. The cabin needs work and the land needs development, but it's fine, Lila said in that same flat tone. Where should I put my things? Noah showed her into the cabin, acutely aware of how small and rough it was. One room, essentially, a sleeping area, a small stove, a table, and 2 chairs he'd built himself. No refinement, no comfort, nothing like the big house she'd grown up in. You can have the bed, Noah said. I'll sleep on the floor until I can build an addition, or... That's ridiculous, Lila interrupted. We're married. We'll share the bed like married people do. She set her trunk down with a thump. I need to change clothes. These are my only town clothes, and I can't work in them. Could you... She gestured, and Noah realized she was asking him to step outside while she changed. He did, standing in the yard with heat climbing his neck, trying not to think about his wife. His wife. Undressing in his cabin. Their cabin now, he supposed. When she emerged 15 minutes later, she was wearing a different work dress, this one gray and even more worn than the brown one. She'd rebraided her hair tightly and washed her face. She looked like she was preparing for hard labor, not beginning married life. What needs doing? She asked. I'm sorry? Around the ranch. What needs doing? Lila looked around the property with an assessing gaze. You've got 6 horses in that corral, feed stores that look low, fences that need mending. I can see 3 spots where the creek's washing away the bank. That'll need reinforcement before the heavy rains come. And your barn roof is leaking. There's water damage on the north side. So what do you want me to start with? Noah stared at her. Lila, you just got married. Maybe we should talk, or rest, or... I don't want to talk, she said, and for the first time emotion cracked through her voice. I don't want to sit in that cabin and think about what just happened, or what you gave up, or what my father said. I want to work. I'm good at work. So please, just tell me what needs doing. Noah understood that impulse, the need to exhaust yourself physically so you didn't have to feel what was churning inside. He'd done it himself often enough. All right, he said quietly. The horses need feeding. There's hay in the barn. Then we can look at the fence line together, figure out what sections are worst. They worked through the afternoon in near silence, communicating only about practical matters. Lila moved around the ranch with the same competent efficiency she'd shown at her father's place, seeing problems Noah had grown blind to and solving them with minimal fuss. By the time the sun began to set, they'd fed the horses, repaired 2 sections of fence, and hauled enough stones from the creek bed to start reinforcing the worst erosion spots. Noah made a simple dinner, beans and cornbread, bachelor food, and they ate at the small table without speaking. The silence was suffocating, but Noah didn't know how to break it. Every time he looked at Lila, he saw her shuttered expression and felt the weight of what he'd done settling heavier on his shoulders. That night, they lay in the narrow bed like 2 boards placed side by side, not touching, barely breathing, the space between them somehow larger than the actual distance. Noah stared at the ceiling in the darkness and wondered if he'd made the worst mistake of his life. Beside him, Lila's breathing was so controlled it had to be conscious, like she was working to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. "Lila?" he started. "Good night, Noah," she said firmly, ending the conversation before it could begin. The days that followed established a pattern. They woke before dawn, worked until they couldn't see anymore, ate simple meals without conversation, and shared the bed like 2 strangers forced to occupy the same space. Lila was everything a rancher could want in a partner: tireless, knowledgeable, efficient. She had the horses eating out of her hand within days, reorganized his tack room so everything was accessible, and started training the young gelding Noah had been putting off working with because he wasn't confident in his skills. But she never smiled, never laughed, never seemed to take any pleasure in the work or the land or the life they were supposedly building together. She treated Noah with unfailing politeness, the way you'd treat a business partner you respected but didn't particularly like. And at night they lay in that bed with careful inches between them, Noah aching with a loneliness that somehow felt worse than it had when he was actually alone. 3 weeks after the wedding, Noah rode into town for supplies. The whispers started the moment he hitched his horse outside the general store. "That's the fool who turned down Rosaline Crow. Married the fat daughter instead. Can you imagine? Probably regrets it every night. Beautiful Rosaline versus that plain thing." Noah's hands clenched into fists, but he kept walking. Inside the store, Mrs. Patterson was working the counter, and her eyes widened when she saw him. "Mr. Briggs, how's married life treating you?" "Fine, ma'am," Noah said, gathering the supplies he needed. "Just need flour, sugar, coffee, and salt." Of course, of course. She bustled around gathering items, talking the whole time. Such excitement at the bride fair this year. Nobody's talked about anything else for weeks. Your wife settling in all right? She's well. Good, good. Must be quite a change for her going from the Crow Ranch to... Mrs. Patterson trailed off delicately, but Noah heard the implication. To your pitiful excuse for a ranch, to poverty after prosperity, to you instead of someone worthy. He paid quickly and left, carrying his supplies back to where his horse waited. 2 men were loitering near the hitching post, ranch hands he recognized from the Crow property. "Well, if it isn't the lucky groom," one of them said with a smirk. "How's it feel, Briggs, getting the leftover daughter?" "Mind your business, Carson," Noah said, loading his saddlebags. "Come on, you can tell us. Does she work as hard in bed as she does in the barn? That's the only advantage to marrying a sturdy woman. They can take a real pounding." The other hand laughed, a crude, ugly sound. Noah turned slowly, his vision narrowing to the 2 men who were still chuckling like they'd said something clever. "What did you say about my wife?" Something in Noah's voice made Carson's smile falter. "I was just joking, Briggs. Don't get—" Noah hit him. One solid punch to the jaw that sent Carson stumbling backward into the hitching post. The other hand started forward, but Noah rounded on him with such fury that the man froze. "Let me make something very clear," Noah said, his voice low and dangerous. "Lila is my wife. She's worth 10 of you useless gossips. And if I hear anyone speaking about her with anything less than respect, they'll answer to me. Are we clear?" Carson was holding his jaw, his eyes watering. "Jesus, Briggs, I was just... We. Clear. Yeah, we're clear." Noah swung into his saddle and rode out of town with his heart pounding and his knuckles aching. He'd never hit a man out of anger before. Always been too worried about the consequences, too aware of his own vulnerability. But hearing them talk about Lila that way, reducing her to crude jokes, had ignited something protective and fierce in his chest. When he got back to the ranch, Lila was working with Midnight in the corral. The stallion was responding beautifully to her cues, moving in elegant circles around her as she stood in the center with just a long lead rope. She looked up as Noah rode in, and her eyes went immediately to his scraped knuckles. "What happened?" "Nothing," Noah said, dismounting and starting to unload supplies. Lila tied Midnight to the fence and walked over, grabbing Noah's hand before he could turn away. She studied the scraped skin with a frown. "This isn't nothing. You hit someone." "Two ranch hands from your father's place were running their mouths in town," Noah said. "I shut them up." "About what?" When Noah didn't answer, Lila's expression tightened. "About me. They were saying things about me, weren't they?" "Nothing worth repeating." "And you hit them for it." She was still holding his hand, her thumb brushing over the scraped knuckles with surprising gentleness. "Noah, you can't fight every person who says something unkind about me. You'll have bloody knuckles the rest of your life." "I don't care," Noah said roughly. "You're my wife. I won't stand by and let people disrespect you." Something flickered across Lila's face. Surprise, confusion, maybe the first hint of something softer. But it was gone quickly, replaced by that careful neutrality. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for defending me. But you don't have to do that. I'm used to people talking." "Well, I'm not used to hearing them talk about you," Noah said, "and I'm not going to accept it as normal. You deserve better." Lila released his hand and stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Do I? I'm the wrong bride, remember? The one you're going to regret choosing." "Lila, you should go wash those knuckles before they get infected. There's soap in the cabin." She walked back to Midnight without waiting for a response, and Noah was left standing in the yard holding a sack of flour and wondering how to breach the wall his wife had built around herself. That night, Noah woke from a restless sleep to hear something he'd never heard before. Lila crying. Quiet, muffled sounds like she was trying to hide it even in sleep. He lay there in the darkness, listening to her grief, and felt his heart break a little more. "Lila," he whispered. "Hey, talk to me." "Go back to sleep," she said, her voice thick. "I can't when you're crying." "What's wrong?" "Everything," she said, and the word came out broken. "Everything's wrong. You married the wrong person, and you're stuck with me, and every day I see you looking at me like you're trying to figure out how to fix a mistake you can't take back." Noah sat up, the old bed frame creaking. "That's not—" "Don't lie to me," Lila said fiercely, sitting up too. "I'm not stupid, Noah. I see how careful you are around me, how polite. We're living like strangers who happen to share a cabin, and I know, you're thinking about what you gave up. Beautiful Rosalind with her silk dresses and her perfect smile, the house in town, the respect, the life you actually wanted. And instead you got me, and you're too decent to say you regret it, but I can feel it. I can feel how much you wish things had gone differently." The words hung in the darkness between them. Noah's throat felt tight, his chest aching with a tangle of emotions he couldn't quite sort through. "You're right," he said finally, and heard Lila's sharp intake of breath. "I do think about what could have been different. But Lila, you're wrong about what I regret. Don't patronize me. I regret that you're so convinced you were the wrong choice that you won't let me show you that you weren't," Noah said, his voice rising. "I regret that I spent 2 weeks looking at your sister when you were standing right there teaching me everything important. I regret that I hurt you by making you feel like second best when the truth is—" He broke off, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "The truth is, I'm the one who's not good enough. For you. I'm a poor rancher with worn-out land and big dreams I probably can't achieve. You could have done so much better than me, but instead you're stuck out here working yourself to death trying to make my pathetic excuse for a ranch functional, and all I can offer you is—" "Stop," Lila said, and her hand found his in the darkness. "Noah, stop." They sat there in the darkness, hands clasped between them, both breathing hard. Noah could feel Lila trembling. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared that one day you'll wake up and hate me for not being what you wanted. I'm scared that I'll never be enough, that you'll always be comparing me to her and finding me lacking. I'm scared that this marriage will destroy us both. I'm scared too, Noah admitted. I'm scared I won't be able to give you the life you deserve, that you'll realize you gave up your whole family for nothing, that I'll fail you the way I've failed at everything else. You haven't failed, Lila said firmly. Look at Midnight. Look at this ranch. You're building something real, Noah. Slowly, maybe, and it's hard, but it's real. We could build it together, Noah said quietly. If you'd let me try, not as a business arrangement or a mistake we're both stuck with, but as actual partners. I know I came into this for the wrong reasons. I know I hurt you by making you think you were a consolation prize. But these past weeks, working beside you, seeing how smart you are and how strong, Lila, you're extraordinary. And I'm asking, not out of duty or guilt, but because I genuinely want to, if you'd give me a chance to prove that choosing you was the smartest thing I've ever done. Lila was quiet for so long, Noah thought she might refuse. Then, in the darkness, he felt her other hand come up to cup his face. You really mean that, she said, wonder in her voice. You actually mean it. I do. But Rosalind can speak French and arrange flowers and probably play the piano, Noah said. But she never once came to that corral. She never taught me how to see what Midnight needed. She never worked beside me through a long day or showed me what real strength looks like. She's beautiful, Lila. I'm not denying that. But you're remarkable. And I was too stupid and desperate to see it at first. But I see it now. I see you. Lila made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You're going to make me hope, she said. And hope is dangerous. Then let's be dangerous together, Noah said. He pulled her closer, and for the first time since their wedding, she came willingly, pressing against him in the darkness. We'll build something here, not just a ranch, but a real life. And maybe, if you can forgive me for being blind at first, maybe we can build something more than just a business partnership. Like what? Lila whispered. Noah thought about all the lonely years, all the times he'd ached for connection, for someone who saw him as more than a drifter or a burden. He thought about how Lila had taught him to see Midnight not as a problem to be solved, but as a creature deserving of understanding. And he realized she'd been teaching him about more than just horses. Like a family, he said. Like love. The real kind, not the fairy tale version. The kind that's built through work and trust and choosing each other every day. Lila was crying again, but this time it sounded different. Not grief, but release. I want that, she said. God help me. I want that so much. But Noah, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me if you change your mind, if you wake up one day and wish things were different, you'll tell me. Don't let this turn into poison. Don't let us destroy each other slowly. Noah wrapped his arms around her, this strong, scared, remarkable woman who'd somehow become his wife. I promise. And I'm making you a promise too. I'm going to spend every day proving that choosing you was choosing right. Maybe I won't always get it perfect. Maybe I'll be stupid sometimes. But I'll keep choosing you, Lila. I'll keep seeing you. That's my promise. She buried her face against his shoulder, and he felt her body shake with sobs that seemed to come from someplace deep and old. He held her through it, rocking slightly, murmuring wordless comfort while she cried out years of being overlooked and dismissed and told she wasn't enough. When the storm finally passed, Lila pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. We're a mess, she said with a shaky laugh. Yeah, Noah agreed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can be a mess together. And there in the darkness of their small cabin, with the wind rattling the shutters and Midnight whickering softly in the barn outside, Noah Briggs kissed his wife for the first time. Not the performative kiss of a wedding ceremony, but something real and chosen and full of possibility. It wasn't perfect. Their noses bumped, and Lila's face was wet with tears, and neither of them really knew what they were doing. But it was theirs, and it was honest, and when they finally pulled apart, Noah saw something in Lila's eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. We'll figure this out, she said, and it sounded like a vow. Together, Noah agreed. They lay back down, but this time without that careful distance between them. Lila curled against Noah's side, her head on his shoulder, and for the first time since the wedding, the silence felt comfortable instead of suffocating. Outside, the spring night wrapped around their small ranch, and somewhere in the darkness, Midnight stood in his corral. No longer a killer horse, but a creature who'd learned that some humans were worth trusting, just like his owners were learning the same lesson about each other, one careful day at a time. The morning after that conversation, something fundamental had shifted between them. Noah woke to find Lila already up, making coffee at the stove, and when she turned to hand him a cup, she smiled. Not the polite, distant expression she'd worn for weeks, but a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. "Morning," she said, and the word felt like a gift. "Morning," Noah replied, taking the coffee and letting his fingers brush hers deliberately. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time." Lila poured her own cup and leaned against the counter, studying him with an openness that hadn't been there before. "I was thinking we should start working with that young gelding today, the bay with the white socks. He's got good lines, and if we can gentle him properly, he'd fetch a decent price as a family horse." "You think we could actually make money at this?" Noah asked. "Horse training as a real business?" "Why not?" Lila said. "You're good with them, I'm good with them, and there's always demand for well-trained horses. The key is doing it differently than everyone else. No breaking, just gentling, building trust instead of fear. It takes longer, but the horses are better for it, and word spreads. People will pay more for a horse that's truly calm instead of just beaten into submission." Noah felt something warm unfurl in his chest. This was the first time Lila had talked about the future like it was something they were building together, not just enduring. "All right, let's try it. Show me what you're thinking." They spent the morning working with the gelding, and Noah watched in fascination as Lila employed the same patient techniques she'd used with Midnight. She moved slowly, spoke quietly, never pushed when the horse showed fear. Within 2 hours, the gelding was taking treats from her hand and allowing her to touch his neck and shoulders. "Your turn," she said, gesturing Noah forward. "Remember, right side always, let him come to you, and if he backs away, you wait. We're not on his schedule, he's on his." Noah followed her instructions, and the gelding, who'd been skittish and nervous when Noah first bought him, cautiously approached. By the time the sun was high overhead, Noah had managed to slip a halter on him without the animal panicking. "That's good progress," Lila said, genuine pride in her voice. "Another week of this and we'll have him leading. 2 weeks and we can start saddle work. He'll be ready to sell within a month. How much do you think we could get for him? If we do this right? Maybe $75. That's good money, Noah. Enough to buy 2 more young horses to train, or to make the repairs this place needs, or—" She stopped, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. "Or to save against the lean times." Noah understood what she wasn't saying. Winter was coming eventually, and his small ranch had no cushion against disaster. One bad season, one serious injury, and they could lose everything. "We'll build that cushion," he said firmly, "together. 1 horse at a time if we have to." Lila's smile returned, and she reached out to squeeze his hand briefly before turning back to the gelding. "Then we'd better get to work." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. They woke before dawn and worked until dark, training horses, mending fences, gradually improving the property one project at a time. But unlike the silent, tense labor of those first weeks, now they talked while they worked. Lila told him stories about the horses she'd trained at her father's ranch, the difficult ones everyone else had given up on that she'd patiently gentled. Noah shared his own memories, the uncle who'd taught him to ride but never let him forget he was Charity, the years of drifting from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "You were lonely," Lila said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "That's why you wanted Rosalind so badly. Not just for the status, but because you thought having something beautiful would mean you weren't alone anymore." "I was wrong about that," Noah said. "Beautiful things can be the loneliest of all if there's nothing real underneath." Lila turned to look at him, and in the fading light her face was soft and open. "I was lonely too, surrounded by people at my father's ranch, but still completely alone because nobody really saw me. I was just the useful daughter, the one who handled the difficult horses and kept the record straight. I don't think anyone ever asked what I wanted or what I dreamed about. What did you dream about? Noah asked quietly. This, Lila said simply. Not this exact situation, obviously, but a place that was mine. Work that mattered. Someone who saw me as more than just a pair of capable hands. It's strange. I spent so many years certain I'd never have any of that, and now here I am. She laughed softly. In a tiny cabin on a struggling ranch, married to a man who picked me by accident, and somehow happier than I've ever been. It wasn't an accident, Noah said, covering her hand with his. Maybe I didn't understand what I was doing at the time, but looking back, I think some part of me knew you were the one who mattered, who was real, who I could actually build a life with. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that until full dark fell and the first stars appeared. When they finally went inside, Noah pulled Lila close in their narrow bed, and she came willingly, fitting against him like she belonged there. They kissed, slow and exploring, learning the taste and feel of each other. When Lila's hands moved to the buttons of Noah's shirt, he caught them gently. "You're sure?" he asked. "I don't want you to feel like you have to." "I'm sure," Lila said firmly. "I want this. I want you. Not out of duty or obligation, but because I'm choosing it, choosing you." What followed was tender and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. They fumbled with clothing and bumped elbows and had to stop twice because they couldn't figure out the logistics in such a small bed. But they also laughed and touched with wonder, and when it was over they lay tangled together in the darkness, both of them a little awed by the intimacy they'd just shared. "Well," Lila said breathlessly, "that was—" "Yeah," Noah agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It really was." After that night, the distance between them dissolved completely. They were truly partners now in every sense, working together during the day, falling into bed exhausted at night, but taking the time to touch and talk and slowly learn how to be married in more than just name. The ranch began to reflect their combined efforts. The fences were repaired, the barn roof patched, the erosion along the creek bank reinforced with careful stonework. They sold the bay gelding for $80, more than Lila had estimated, and immediately bought 3 more young horses to train. But it wasn't all smooth progress. In late summer, a brief but violent storm tore part of the barn roof off again, undoing weeks of work. Noah spent an entire day trying to repair it, growing increasingly frustrated as each fix proved inadequate. By evening, he was ready to put his fist through a wall. "It's not working," he said, throwing his hammer down. "I fix one section and another section leaks. This whole damn roof needs to be replaced, and we don't have the money for that." "Then we patch it and live with some leaks," Lila said practically. She was sitting on a hay bale, mending a torn bridle. "It's not perfect, but it'll keep the horses mostly dry. We'll save money from the next few sales and replace the whole roof properly next spring. That's 6 months away. 6 months of water damage and soggy hay and— Noah!" Lila set down the bridle and walked over to where he stood glowering at the offending roof. "Listen to me. This ranch isn't going to be perfect tomorrow or next week or even next year. We're building something from almost nothing, and that takes time. But we're doing it together, and we're making progress. Remember that broken-down corral when I first got here? Now it's solid. Remember when we had 6 horses and no real plan? Now we have 9 horses and a training method that works. We're moving forward, even when it doesn't feel like it." Noah pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "How are you so calm about everything?" "Because I spent years watching my father try to force things into being what he wanted instead of working with what they were," Lila said. "It never worked. Not with horses, not with people, not with anything. You can't force a ranch into prosperity any more than you can force a horse into trust. You just do the work, day after day, and trust that effort accumulates into something worthwhile." She was right, of course. Noah kissed her soundly and went back to patching the roof, this time with more patience and less fury. Lila stayed nearby, occasionally handing him tools or holding a board steady, and together they managed to create something that wasn't perfect, but was good enough. That night, as they lay in bed listening to rain patter against the patched roof, Lila said quietly, "I'm proud of you, of us, of what we're building here. even though it's small and rough and barely profitable? Especially because of that, Lila said. Anyone can succeed when they start with money and status and every advantage. We're doing it from nothing, and that means when we do succeed, and we will, it'll be because we earned it, every single bit. By autumn, they'd sold 4 trained horses and had a waiting list of 3 more buyers. Word was spreading that the Briggs Ranch, people had stopped calling it Noah's Place and started calling it by both their names, had a special touch with difficult horses. They took the animals nobody else wanted, the ones too skittish or stubborn or damaged, and turned them into reliable mounts through patience and understanding. It was satisfying work, but also exhausting. Noah sometimes caught Lila rubbing her lower back after a long day, or saw her wince when she lifted something heavy. She never complained, never suggested they should slow down, but he worried about her pushing too hard. "You need to rest more," he told her one evening after watching her limp slightly coming in from the barn. "You're working yourself into the ground." "I'm fine," Lila said automatically. "You're limping, and don't tell me you're fine when I can see that you're hurting." Lila sighed and sank into one of the chairs at their small table. "My hip gets sore sometimes. It's nothing serious, just I've always been heavy, and all this physical work takes a toll. It'll be better in the morning after I've rested." Noah knelt beside her chair, concerned. "How long has this been happening?" "Years, since I was a teenager, really. My father used to say it was my own fault for being too big, that if I'd eat less and weigh less, I wouldn't have these problems." Lila's voice was matter-of-fact, but Noah heard the old hurt underneath. "The ranch doctor said the same thing, told me to lose weight and it would stop. But I tried that, and nothing changed, and eventually I just accepted that sometimes I hurt." "That's not acceptable," Noah said firmly. "If you're in pain, we need to figure out why and how to help it. Maybe there's a doctor in Silver Springs who'd actually listen instead of just assuming, 'Noah, doctors cost money we don't have. And even if we could afford it, what are they going to tell me that I haven't already heard? I'm fat. I work too hard. I should somehow be different than I am. I'd rather save the money and just deal with it.'" Noah wanted to argue, but he knew she was right about the money. They were profitable now, but barely, and every dollar went either toward the ranch or into their small savings against disaster. Still, the thought of Lila working through pain day after day while he did nothing made his chest ache. "At least let me help," he said. "Show me where it hurts worst and I'll rub it. My uncle taught me a little about working out muscle knots, said every ranch hand should know basic doctoring for man and beast." Lila looked skeptical but also hopeful. "You do that?" "Every night if you need it. You're my wife, Lila. Your pain is my concern." So that became part of their routine. After dinner, while they talked about the day's work and planned tomorrow's projects, Noah would work his thumbs into the knots in Lila's lower back and hips, gradually coaxing the muscles to release their tension. The first few times she tensed up, self-conscious about his hands on her body in this clinical way. But eventually she relaxed into it, even laughing when he found a particularly stubborn knot and she yelped. "Better?" he'd ask when he finished. "Much," she'd say, and mean it. Those quiet evening conversations, with Noah's hands working gently over Lila's aching muscles, became some of his favorite times. She'd tell him about her day with the horses, which ones were progressing, and which ones needed more patience. He'd share his own observations, and together they'd strategize about training techniques and ranch improvements. It was partnership in its purest form. 2 people working toward common goals, supporting each other through the hard parts, celebrating the small victories together. In October, they got a visitor. Noah was working with one of the young horses when he heard hoofbeats approaching. He looked up to see a thin, gangly girl of maybe 16 riding a sway-backed mare. The girl was heavy, broader through the shoulders and hips than most girls her age, and she sat her horse with hunched shoulders like she was trying to make herself smaller. "Can I help you?" Noah called. The girl pulled her mare to a stop at the edge of the property, her eyes darting nervously between Noah and the barn. "I'm looking for Mrs. Briggs." "Lila Briggs. Is she here?" "I'm here," Lila said, emerging from the barn with midnight trailing behind her like a large, dangerous dog. "What do you need?" The girl slid off her horse awkwardly, nearly losing her balance. Up close, Noah could see she'd been crying. Her face was blotchy, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, with mousy brown hair pulled back in a messy braid and a dress that had been let out multiple times to accommodate her size. "My name's Sarah," the girl said, her voice shaking. "Sarah Morrison. My pa's ranch is about 20 miles west near the river bend. I heard—" She swallowed hard. "I heard you know about horses, and I heard you used to live in town but left because people talked about how you looked." Lila's expression softened with understanding. "Come inside, Sarah. You look like you could use some water and a place to sit." They settled at the small table in the cabin, and Sarah's story came out in fits and starts. She loved horses, had helped her father with them since she was small. But recently her father had decided she was too clumsy, too heavy, too much of a liability around valuable animals. He'd forbidden her to work with them anymore, said she should focus on housework and finding a husband, though they both knew no boy in the territory would look twice at a girl built like Sarah. "He says I'm an embarrassment," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Says I break things and scare the horses and make him look bad in front of his hands. But I don't mean to. I'm bigger than other girls, and I move wrong, and I don't fit anywhere." She looked at Lila with desperate hope. "But then I heard about you. How you're big too, but you work with horses anyway. How you married Mr. Briggs even though the whole town said you were the wrong choice. And I thought maybe you could teach me. Make me better somehow. Make me into someone who isn't so wrong all the time." Lila was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Noah saw her throat work as she swallowed, saw the way her jaw tightened with old pain recognizing new pain. "Sarah," Lila said finally, "come with me." She led the girl outside to where Midnight stood in his corral, the black stallion who'd once been labeled a killer. He lifted his head as they approached, ears forward, watching with calm interest. "You see this horse?" Lila said. "Everyone said he was wrong too. Too aggressive, too damaged, too dangerous to be useful. People beat him and hobbled him and tried to break him into being what they wanted. It didn't work. It just made him angrier and more scared. Do you know what did work?" Sarah shook her head, staring at the magnificent stallion. "Accepting what he was and working with it instead of against it," Lila said. "This horse wasn't wrong. The people trying to force him into a mold were wrong. Once we stopped trying to break him and started trying to understand him, everything changed. He's one of the best horses on this ranch now." She turned to face Sarah directly. "You're not wrong, Sarah. You're not too big or too clumsy or too much of anything. You're exactly what you are, and that's not a flaw that needs fixing. It's just you. What you need is someone who'll teach you how to work with horses in a way that fits your body and your strengths, not someone who'll try to make you move like a smaller, daintier person. Because you're not a smaller, daintier person, and pretending otherwise will just make you clumsy." "But I do break things," Sarah said miserably. "I knock over buckets and trip over my own feet, and—" "Because you're trying to move in ways that don't fit your body," Lila interrupted. "You're hunching your shoulders and trying to make yourself small, which throws off your balance. You're rushing because you think being fast will make people notice your size less. But rushing makes you careless, and being hunched makes you clumsy. If you'd stand up straight, move deliberately instead of rushing, and use your strength instead of apologizing for it, you'd be more graceful than half the petite little things in the territory." Sarah looked at her with something like awe. "You really think so?" "I know so. I spent years trying to be smaller, quieter, less than what I was. It didn't work. The moment I stopped apologizing for taking up space and started using my strength as an advantage, everything got easier." Lila glanced at Noah. "We're busy with our own horses, but if you want to learn, really learn, not just be told you're doing everything wrong, you can come here 3 days a week. I'll teach you how to work with horses the way I work with them. Fair?" "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, please, thank you." "One condition," Lila said firmly. "No more slouching, no more making yourself small. You stand up straight, you take up the space you need, and you move like you have every right to be exactly where you are. Because you do." Sarah straightened her shoulders almost unconsciously, and even that small change made her look more confident, more grounded. "Yes, ma'am. After Sarah left, Noah found Lila standing in the barn, staring at nothing. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a shaky exhale. "That girl could have been me," she said quietly. 10 years ago, that was me. Trying to shrink myself down, convinced I was wrong just for existing in a body people didn't approve of. "You gave her something important today," Noah said. "Hope and practical help. That's more than most people get." "I want to do more," Lila said, turning in his arms to face him. "Noah, what if we didn't just train horses? What if we took in kids like Sarah, taught them how to work with animals, gave them a place where being different wasn't a flaw? We've got the space and the horses and barely enough money to support ourselves," Noah finished, but his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "But I see what you're thinking. Kids like Sarah could learn horse training, and in exchange they'd help around the ranch. It would be work trade, not charity." "Exactly. We teach them something valuable. They help us build this place up, and everyone benefits, especially kids who've been told their whole lives that they're not good enough." Lila's eyes were bright with excitement. "We could give them what nobody gave us, a place to belong." Noah thought about his own childhood, drifting from one grudging relative to another, never quite fitting anywhere. He thought about Lila hidden away at her father's ranch, useful but never valued. And he thought about Sarah's desperate hope when someone finally told her she wasn't wrong. "All right," he said, "let's try it. Start with Sarah, see how it goes. If it works, we can think about taking on others." Lila kissed him, fierce and grateful. "Thank you for believing in this, for believing in me." "Always," Noah said simply. Sarah came 3 days a week like clockwork, riding her sway-backed mare the 20 miles each way. Lila was a patient teacher, but demanding in her own way. She made Sarah stand straight, move deliberately, use her strength to advantage. She taught her how to approach nervous horses, how to read their body language, how to earn trust through consistency rather than force. Noah watched the transformation with amazement. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had stopped slouching. Within a month, she was moving around the horses with real confidence. She still wasn't graceful in the way small, delicate girls were graceful, but she had her own kind of grace, solid, grounded, powerful in a way that made the horses relax rather than spook. "You're doing so well," Lila told her one afternoon as Sarah successfully led a nervous mare through a series of groundwork exercises. "See how she trusts you? That's because you're trustworthy. You move with confidence, you're consistent in your cues, and you respect her boundaries. That's good horsemanship." Sarah's face glowed with pride. "My pa said I'd never amount to anything with horses. Said I was too clumsy." "Your pa was wrong," Lila said flatly. "You're not clumsy. You were just trying to be something you're not. Now you're being yourself, and look how much better it works." One evening after Sarah had left, Noah found Lila crying quietly in the barn. He sat beside her in the hay, pulling her close. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Lila said, wiping her eyes. I never thought I'd have this. A home that's really mine. A husband who chose me. A purpose beyond just being useful. And now Sarah, and the possibility of helping other kids like her. It feels too good to be real sometimes, like I'm going to wake up back in my father's house, still the hidden daughter nobody wants to claim. "This is real," Noah said firmly. "You're not hidden anymore, Lila. You're seen. By me, by Sarah, by everyone who comes to this ranch looking for help with their horses. You're building something important here, and you don't have to be afraid it'll disappear." "Promise me we'll keep doing this," Lila said fiercely. "Even when it's hard, even when money's tight. Promise we'll keep being a place where people like Sarah can learn they're not broken." "I promise," Noah said. "We're in this together, all of it." As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch transformed. They'd sold 7 horses by November and had a waiting list that stretched into the spring. They'd saved enough to not just replace the barn roof, but to add a small addition to the cabin. Nothing fancy, just enough room for a second bed and a little privacy when they eventually had overnight guests. Sarah had started bringing another girl with her, a thin, nervous teenager named Emma, who'd been orphaned the year before and was working as a scullery maid in a Silver Springs boarding house. Emma was terrified of horses at first, but Lila worked with her the same way she'd worked with Midnight and Sarah, patient, consistent, never pushing past what Emma could handle. "You see?" Lila told Emma one day as the girls successfully brushed down a gentle mare without panicking. Horses aren't monsters, and neither are you. You've just been told by scared people that the world is more dangerous than it is, but you're learning the truth now. In December, a bitter cold snap hit the territory. Noah and Lila worked around the clock keeping the horses warm, breaking ice in the water troughs, making sure every animal had adequate shelter. It was exhausting, brutal work, but they did it together, taking shifts so one of them could always rest while the other kept watch. One night, deep in the coldest part of winter, Noah woke to find Lila staring at the cabin ceiling. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Just thinking," Lila said. "A year ago, I thought I'd spend my whole life at my father's ranch, working hard, never acknowledged, slowly becoming invisible. And now look at us. We have this place, these horses, Sarah and Emma, who come here because they need what we have to teach. We're building something that matters, Noah. Something real." "We are," Noah agreed, pulling her close. "And it's because of you. Your knowledge, your patience, your ability to see potential in broken things. This ranch works because of you, Lila." "It works because of us," she corrected. "You gave me a place to build something. You chose me when choosing me cost you everything you thought you wanted. That gift, being chosen, being seen, that's what makes all of this possible." Noah kissed her temple, her cheek, finally her mouth. "Best choice I ever made. Choosing you over Rosalind, this life over status, reality over fantasy. Best damn choice." Lila laughed softly. "Even when the roof leaks and the money's tight and we're breaking ice at 3 in the morning? Especially then," Noah said firmly, "because we're doing it together. Because I'd rather break ice with you at 3 in the morning than attend fancy dinners with someone who looks beautiful but doesn't see me. This is real, Lila. This is what matters." They made love slowly in the warmth of their small cabin while winter howled outside. Two people who'd been told they were wrong their entire lives, proving that together they were exactly right. Afterward, Lila curled against Noah's chest, her breathing evening out into sleep. Noah lay awake a while longer, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The bride fair that had seemed so important. The killer horse that had seemed impossible to tame. The moment he'd chosen Lila and seen her father's fury, heard the crowd's laughter, felt the weight of having made what everyone said was the wrong choice. Except it hadn't been wrong. It had been the only right choice in a life full of wrong turns and missed opportunities. Lila had given him purpose, partnership, and a love he hadn't known existed. Not the showy, performative kind, but the steady, deep kind that sustained you through hard winters and difficult seasons. Outside, Midnight whinnied softly in his shelter, and one of the young horses answered. The wind rattled the shutters, but the cabin stayed warm. And Noah Briggs, former drifter and present rancher, held his wife close and felt something he'd been chasing his whole life without knowing it. Peace. The next morning brought the kind of clear, cold beauty that only winter could create. Everything sparkled with frost, and the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. Sarah arrived with Emma, both girls bundled against the cold, and they spent the day working with the horses and learning new techniques from Lila. Noah watched from across the corral as Lila demonstrated proper halter placement, her voice calm and encouraging, her movements confident. This was who she'd always been, he realized, strong and capable and extraordinary. She'd just been forced to hide it, to make herself smaller to fit into her father's idea of what a daughter should be. But here, on this small, struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere, Lila Briggs wasn't hiding anymore. She stood tall, took up space, used her strength without apologizing. And watching her teach two young women that they could do the same, Noah felt his chest swell with pride and love so intense it was almost painful. "You're staring," Lila called across the corral, a smile playing at her lips. "Can't help it," Noah called back. "You're worth staring at." The girls giggled, and Lila's cheeks flushed pink with pleasure. "Get back to work, husband. These fences won't mend themselves." "Yes, ma'am," Noah said with mock solemnity, and returned to his task with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there a year ago. That evening, after Sarah and Emma had left and the horses were settled for the night, Noah and Lila sat on their small porch wrapped in blankets against the cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "I love this life," Lila said quietly. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because they're ours. Me too, Noah said, taking her hand. Every bit of it. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been broken by the world's judgment learning how to be whole together. And in that moment, with winter wrapped around them and their small ranch stretching out in the moonlight, they were exactly where they needed to be. The killer horse in the barn was gentle now. The wrong daughter had become the right wife. And the drifter with nothing to his name had found something more valuable than all the status and beauty in the territory. A partner who saw him, chose him, and built a life with him one difficult, beautiful day at a time. Spring arrived with the kind of hope that made a man forget winter had ever existed. The snow melted into rushing creeks, the grass turned green almost overnight, and the horses shed their winter coats in great itchy patches that Lila spent hours brushing out. Noah had never seen the ranch look so prosperous. 12 horses in various stages of training, a waiting list of buyers, and enough money saved that they'd actually slept soundly for the first time in months, without worrying about one bad month destroying them. Sarah had become a permanent fixture, arriving every Monday and staying through Wednesday night in the small addition they'd built. Emma came less regularly, but was slowly overcoming her fear of horses and had even started helping with the younger animals. Word had spread about the Briggs Ranch being a place where difficult horses and difficult young people could both find their footing, and Noah had started getting inquiries from as far away as Silver Springs. "We might actually make something of this place," he told Lila one morning in early April as they watched the sun rise over the eastern pasture. "A real business, not just scraping by." "Don't jinx it," Lila said, but she was smiling. "The moment you get comfortable is when disaster strikes." She was joking, but her words proved prophetic in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The trouble started with a letter delivered by a rider from town. Noah was working with one of the younger horses when the man rode up, looking uncomfortable. He handed Noah an official-looking envelope sealed with red wax and wouldn't meet his eyes. "What's this?" Noah asked, turning the envelope over. "Legal notice," the rider said. "I'm just the messenger, Briggs. Don't shoot me for what's inside." He wheeled his horse around and left before Noah could ask any questions. Lila emerged from the barn, took one look at Noah's face, and came over immediately. "What is it?" Noah broke the seal and read the document, his stomach dropping with each line. When he finished, he had to read it again because it didn't make sense the first time. "Noah, you're scaring me. What does it say?" "It's from your father," Noah said, his voice hollow. "He's claiming I stole Midnight. Says the deal was for marriage to his prettiest daughter, which he maintains was Rosaline, not you. Since I didn't fulfill my end of the bargain properly, the horse is still legally his property, and he's demanding I return him within 30 days or face charges of horse theft." Lila's face went white. "He can't do that. The judge married us in front of hundreds of witnesses. It was legal." "He's arguing it was done under false pretenses, that I deliberately misinterpreted his bargain to steal both you and the horse." Noah crumpled the paper in his fist, rage and fear warring in his chest. "Horse theft carries a hanging sentence, Lila. He's not just trying to take Midnight back. He's threatening my life." They stood in the morning sunlight, the beautiful spring day, suddenly feeling ominous. Sarah came out of the barn leading one of the mares, took one look at their faces, and stopped. "What happened?" "My father happened," Lila said, her voice brittle. "He's decided to destroy us." They spent that day trying to figure out their options. The letter had been sent by a lawyer in Silver Springs, which meant Crow was serious enough to spend money on this. Noah rode into Redwater Crossing to consult with Judge Whitmore, leaving Lila and Sarah to manage the ranch work. Whitmore read the legal notice with a deepening frown. "This is vindictive nonsense, but it's also clever. Your marriage was legal. I performed it myself, and we have witnesses. But the horse, technically, the deal was that any man who tamed the stallion could claim Crow's prettiest daughter. The horse was the test, not the prize. Crow's arguing that since you didn't actually win the right daughter, you never won the right to keep the horse." "That's insane," Noah said. "The horse was part of the deal. I tamed him. I married a Crow daughter. That was the bargain." In front of witnesses who heard Crow promise marriage to his prettiest daughter, yes, but nobody explicitly discussed the horse's ownership afterward. Crow could argue he only lent you the horse for the trial period, and since the marriage was contested, the marriage wasn't contested. You performed it. It's legal. Legal, yes, but was it what Crow intended? That's what a court would have to decide. Whitmore set the paper down and looked at Noah with sympathy. Briggs, I'll be honest with you, Crow's rich, connected, and angry. He's got the money to drag this through courts for years if he wants. You've got a struggling ranch and a year-old marriage that the whole territory knows happened because you chose the wrong daughter. A judge might rule in your favor based on the letter of the law, but it'll cost you everything you have in legal fees to get there. Noah felt the walls closing in. So what do I do? Give him back Midnight and hope he drops the charges? That might be wisest. Cut your losses, keep your neck, move on. Midnight isn't a loss to cut, Noah said heatedly. He stopped, realizing how he sounded. But it was true. Midnight wasn't just a horse anymore. He was the foundation of their training program, the proof that Lila's methods worked, the living reminder of how far both Noah and the stallion had come from that first violent day in the corral. Giving him back to Crow would be like giving back a piece of their marriage, their partnership, everything they'd built. I'll talk to Lila, Noah said finally. See what she thinks. He rode back to the ranch slowly, dreading the conversation ahead. But when he arrived, Lila was waiting on the porch with her arms crossed and her jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to know well. We're not giving him back, she said before Noah could even dismount. I know what you're going to say, that it's safer, that we can't afford a legal battle, that keeping Midnight isn't worth your life. But I'm telling you right now, we're not giving that horse back to my father. Lila, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, she interrupted. My father wants to break us. That's what this is really about. He's been angry since the bride fair, humiliated that you chose me over Rosaline, furious that the whole territory saw him lose control of his own bargain. He's spent a year stewing in that anger, and now he's striking back. If we give him Midnight, he won't stop there. He'll find something else to threaten, some other way to destroy what we've built. We have to fight him. Fighting him could mean I hang for horse theft, Noah said bluntly. Is Midnight worth that? Lila's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. You're not just fighting for Midnight. You're fighting for the principle that he doesn't get to rewrite deals after the fact, that he doesn't get to take back his word just because he doesn't like the outcome. And yes, Noah, that's worth fighting for. Because if we don't stand up to him now, we'll spend the rest of our lives afraid of what he might do next. Sarah had been standing nearby, pretending to mend tack but clearly listening. Now she spoke up, her young voice fierce. Mrs. Briggs is right. Men like the marshal, they think they can push people around because they always have. Somebody's got to push back. Noah looked between his wife and the girl she'd taken under her wing, saw the determination in both their faces, and felt something shift in his chest. They were right. This wasn't really about the horse. It was about whether he'd let Crow dictate the terms of his life out of fear, or whether he'd stand his ground and fight for what was his. All right, he said, we fight, but we fight smart. We need documentation, witnesses, everything we can gather to prove the deal was legitimate and the horse is legally ours. They spent the next week building their case. Judge Whitmore agreed to testify about the wedding and the circumstances surrounding it. They tracked down merchants who'd been at the bride fair and heard Crow's exact words. They documented every penny Noah had spent on Midnight's care over the past year, creating a paper trail that showed ownership. Lila wrote out a detailed account of the 2 weeks of training, including how her father had supervised and never once questioned Noah's right to the horse. But even with all their preparation, Noah could see the worry lines deepening around Lila's eyes. The stress was taking its toll. She pushed herself harder than ever during the day, working until she was exhausted, and lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. Noah would pull her close and feel the tension radiating from her body. Talk to me, he'd whisper in the darkness. I'm scared, she'd admit. Not of losing Midnight, but of losing you. If this goes wrong, if my father manages to make the horse theft charges stick. He won't. You don't know that. He's got money and influence and a grudge big enough to motivate him through years of legal battles. We've got a year-old ranch and the testimony of people who might not want to cross him. Noah had no good answer for that, so he just held her tighter and hoped love and determination would somehow be enough. The preliminary hearing was set for late April in Silver Springs. Noah and Lila rode into town together the day before, staying at a modest boarding house they could barely afford. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar room, Lila turned to Noah with desperation in her eyes. "Promise me something," she said. "If this goes badly, if they find against you, I want you to run. Take midnight and ride for California or Oregon or anywhere my father's reach doesn't extend. Start over. I'll follow when I can or—" "Stop," Noah said firmly. "I'm not running. I'm not leaving you. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." "But if you hang—" "I won't. We have a solid case. We have witnesses, and we have the truth on our side. Your father can be as vindictive as he wants, but at the end of the day, I fulfilled that bargain. I tamed his killer horse, and I married his daughter. Not the daughter he wanted me to marry, maybe, but a daughter nonetheless. The law is on our side." "The law doesn't always matter when money and influence are involved," Lila said quietly. Noah kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. "Then we'll make it matter. Tomorrow, we walk into that courtroom with our heads high, and we tell the truth. That's all we can do." They made love that night with a kind of desperate intensity, as if trying to memorize each other in case they were separated. Afterward, Lila cried quietly against Noah's chest, and he held her and whispered promises he prayed he could keep. The next morning, they dressed in their best clothes, which still looked shabby compared to the finery they'd see in the courtroom, and walked to the county courthouse together. It was a brick building on Main Street, imposing and official. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. News of the hearing had spread, and people were curious to see how the drama between Marshall Crowe and the rancher who'd chosen the wrong daughter would resolve. Noah saw familiar faces in the crowd. Judge Whitmore, who'd agreed to testify. Several merchants from Redwater Crossing. Carson, the ranch hand Noah had punched, looking nervous. And then, stepping down from a fine carriage, Marshal Jed Crowe himself. Crowe looked older than Noah remembered, his face lined with bitterness and his eyes hard. But he was dressed expensively and moved with the confidence of a man who expected to win. Behind him, stepping down from the same carriage, was Rosaline. She looked as beautiful as ever in a pale green dress, her hair arranged in elaborate curls. But there was something different about her expression, a tightness around her mouth, a weariness in her eyes. She glanced at Lila and Noah, and for just a moment something that might have been regret flickered across her face. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it?" Crowe said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The thief and the unwanted daughter come to face justice." "We're not thieves," Noah said steadily. "And Lila was never unwanted, just undervalued. There's a difference." Crowe's face reddened, but before he could respond, the bailiff appeared in the courthouse doorway and called them inside. The courtroom was smaller than Noah expected, but still intimidating. A judge sat at the bench, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Hammond, who Noah had heard was fair but rigid in his interpretation of law. Crowe and his lawyer sat on one side, Noah and Lila on the other. They couldn't afford a lawyer, so Noah would be representing himself. Judge Hammond called the hearing to order and read the complaint. Marshal Jed Crowe alleges that Mr. Noah Briggs acquired a black stallion through fraudulent means, specifically by deliberately misinterpreting the terms of a public bargain. Mr. Briggs contends the horse was legitimately won through fulfillment of said bargain. We're here to determine the facts and decide ownership. Marshal Crowe, your lawyer may proceed. The lawyer was a slick man from Denver, expensive and confident. He laid out Crowe's case methodically. The bride-fair bargain had been clear in its intent, even if not perfectly worded. Crowe had obviously meant his beautiful daughter Rosaline, as evidenced by her presence on the platform and the context of the event. Briggs had deliberately twisted the wording to claim both the lesser daughter and the valuable horse, essentially committing fraud. Since the marriage had been performed under these false pretenses, it couldn't be considered legitimate fulfillment of the bargain, and therefore the horse remained Crowe's property. Furthermore, the lawyer said, Mr. Briggs has refused repeated requests to return the animal, despite knowing his claim to it is questionable. This suggests intent to deprive the rightful owner of valuable property, which meets the territory's definition of horse theft. It was damning, presented with legal precision and backed by Crowe's reputation. Noah felt Lila's hand find his under the table, gripping tight enough to hurt. Then it was Noah's turn. He stood, acutely aware of his worn clothes and lack of legal training, and began to speak. Your Honor, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not good with fancy words, but I know the truth, and the truth is this. Marshal Crowe made a public bargain. He said any man who could tame his black stallion could claim his prettiest daughter's hand in marriage. Those were his exact words, heard by hundreds of people. I tamed that stallion. It took me 2 weeks of hard work, learning from Miss Lila Crow how to gentle him instead of break him. On Judgment Day, I rode that horse through the square calm as a lady's mount, and Marshal Crow acknowledged I'd fulfilled the bargain. The bargain was for Rosalind, Crow interrupted, but the judge held up a hand. You'll have a chance to respond, Marshal. Continue, Mr. Briggs. Noah took a breath. The Marshal says he meant Rosalind, but his exact words were prettiest daughter. He didn't specify. Now, I'll admit I came to that bride fair thinking Rosalind was what I wanted. She's beautiful, anyone can see that. But during those 2 weeks of working with the stallion, I got to know Lila. She taught me everything about horses, spent hours in that corral helping me understand what that animal needed. She's smart and strong and braver than anyone I've ever met. By the time Judgment Day came, I realized she was the prettiest daughter. Not in the way most people measure pretty, maybe, but in the ways that matter for building a real life. This is nonsense, the lawyer said. Prettiest clearly refers to physical appearance. Does it? Noah challenged. Because I've learned there's lots of ways to be pretty. There's pretty like a painting, nice to look at but not much use. And there's pretty like a sunrise or a good horse or a well-built fence. Pretty because it works, because it matters, because it makes life better. Lila Crow is that second kind of pretty, and that's what I chose. The Marshal's angry because I didn't choose the ornamental daughter, but he never specified which kind of pretty he meant. That's his mistake, not mine. Judge Hammond leaned forward. What about the horse, Mr. Briggs? The bargain was for a daughter's hand in marriage. Why do you claim ownership of the stallion? Because the horse was part of the test, Your Honor. The deal was tame the horse, marry the daughter. I did both. Nobody ever said I had to give the horse back afterward. That would make no sense. The whole point was proving I could handle a difficult animal, and if I succeeded, I'd get the horse and the wife as a package. That's how everyone understood it. That's not how everyone understood it, Crow's lawyer said smoothly. The Marshal was using the horse as a test of worthiness, not offering it as part of the prize. The true prize was marriage into a prominent family with a substantial dowry, which I didn't get, Noah interrupted. Marshal Crow cut the dowry in half because I married Lila instead of Rosalind, so I got less money, no house in town, and a wife everyone says was the wrong choice. If the horse was never part of the deal, then what exactly did I win? Just a wife the Marshal didn't value enough to give me the full dowry for. That seems like a raw deal for 2 weeks of dangerous work. A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom. Judge Hammond's lips twitched, but he kept his expression stern. Mr. Briggs raises a valid point. If the horse wasn't part of the bargain, the deal seems quite one-sided. Marshal Crow, did you at any time inform Mr. Briggs that the horse would need to be returned after the wedding? Crow stood, his face red. I didn't think I needed to spell out that a valuable stallion wasn't included in a marriage bargain. That should have been obvious to anyone with sense. But you never said it explicitly, the judge pressed. No, but... And you supervised Mr. Briggs working with the horse for 2 full weeks without ever mentioning that he wouldn't keep it? The work wasn't about ownership. It was about proving himself. Did you tell him that? Crow's jaw worked. I expected him to understand the terms. So you never explicitly stated the terms, Judge Hammond said. You made a public bargain that was vague in its wording, supervised 2 weeks of labor without clarifying the details, and then became angry when the outcome wasn't what you wanted. Is that accurate? He chose the wrong daughter deliberately. Did you specify which daughter in your original bargain? The courtroom went silent. Crow looked at his lawyer, who was frantically shuffling through papers. Finally, Crow said, I had Rosalind standing on the platform. It was obvious. Obvious is not the same as explicit, the judge said. In matters of law, we deal with what was said, not what was obvious or intended. You said prettiest daughter. Mr. Briggs chose a daughter. Judge Whitmore legally married them. That fulfills the stated bargain. But the horse was the test subject, yes, but nothing in your bargain indicated it would be returned. In the absence of explicit terms, the reasonable interpretation is that the horse, having been the center of the trial and having formed a bond with Mr. Briggs during those 2 weeks, would remain with him. To claim otherwise a full year later after Mr. Briggs has paid for the animal's upkeep and used it to build his business, Seems more like vindictiveness than legitimate legal claim. Crow's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, we're asking the court to consider the spirit of the agreement, not just the letter. The spirit of the agreement was that any man who could tame the stallion would win a Crow daughter, Judge Hammond said. Mr. Briggs tamed the stallion and married a Crow daughter. The spirit has been fulfilled. Unless you have evidence that Mr. Briggs acted fraudulently or that there were explicit terms about the horse being returned, I'm inclined to rule in his favor. The entire town knew Rosalind was meant to be the prize, the lawyer argued desperately. This was a clear case of what the town knew or assumed is not legally binding, the judge said firmly. What matters is what was said in the public bargain. And based on the testimony I've heard, Mr. Briggs fulfilled that bargain exactly as stated. Verdict for the defendant. The horse remains with Mr. Briggs. The marriage stands as legal and legitimate. Any further harassment on this matter will be considered abuse of legal process. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Noah felt Lila's hand squeeze his so hard his fingers went numb, but he didn't care. They'd won. Against all odds, against Crow's money and influence and vindictive fury, they'd actually won. Crow's face had gone from red to purple. This is an outrage. That horse is worth $2,000. Then you should have been more careful with your wording when you made your public bargain, Judge Hammond said unsympathetically. Court is adjourned. People started filing out, buzzing with conversation. Noah turned to Lila and saw tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling wider than he'd ever seen. We won, she whispered. Noah, we actually won. We did, he said, pulling her into his arms right there in the courtroom, not caring who saw. It's over. The horse is ours. The marriage is ours. The life we built is ours. He can't take any of it away. They held each other while the courtroom emptied around them, two people who'd been told their whole lives they weren't good enough, proving that when you stood your ground and told the truth, sometimes justice actually prevailed. When they finally pulled apart, Noah saw Rosalind standing near the doorway, alone. Crow and his lawyer had already left, probably to argue about appeals. Rosalind was watching Noah and Lila with an expression that was hard to read. Lila saw her too and stiffened slightly. The sisters hadn't spoken since the wedding, hadn't even been in the same room. Now they faced each other across the empty courtroom, years of complicated history hanging between them. Rosalind, Lila said carefully. Lila. Rosalind walked closer, her silk dress whispering against the floor. I wanted to say, I'm glad you won. Father's been impossible this past year, consumed with anger over what happened at the bride fair. I tried to tell him to let it go, that you and Mr. Briggs deserved to be left alone, but he wouldn't listen. You tried? Lila's voice was skeptical. I did. Not very hard, admittedly. I've never been good at standing up to Father. That was always more your strength. Rosalind looked at Noah, really looked at him, and he saw a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there at the bride fair. I watched you choose her, you know. Watched you pick my sister when everyone expected you to claim me. I was humiliated at first, angry. I couldn't understand why anyone would choose Lila over me. Rosalind, Lila started, but her sister held up a hand. Let me finish. This past year, I've watched Father grow bitter and small, watched him pour his energy into revenge instead of moving forward. And I realized something. You both had the courage to choose what was real over what was expected. I've never done that. I've spent my whole life being what Father wanted me to be. Beautiful, decorative, obedient. I thought that was what made me valuable, but now I wonder if I've just been another possession in his collection, like a fine horse or an expensive painting. She looked at Lila with something that might have been envy. You're free, Lila. You have a husband who chose you for who you are, not what you look like. You have a life you built with your own hands. You're not dependent on Father's approval or anyone else's opinion. I thought I was the lucky sister, but I was wrong. It's not too late, Lila said quietly. You can still choose differently. Find your own life. Your own... Can I? Rosalind smiled sadly. I'm 23 years old and have no skills beyond playing piano and making polite conversation. I've had 3 marriage prospects in the past year, and all of them evaporated because Father scared them off, said I was too valuable to waste on men who weren't worthy. I think he's trying to keep me trapped there with him, angry and bitter forever. I think I'm going to end up exactly like him if I don't find a way out." "Then find a way out," Noah said, speaking up for the first time. "You're not your father, Rosalind. You're young and smart, and you can learn new skills. It won't be easy, but neither is staying trapped in a life that's slowly destroying you." Rosalind studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'll try." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her sister. "For what it's worth, Lila, I'm sorry. Sorry I never stood up for you when Father dismissed you. Sorry I never told you that I admired your strength even when I didn't understand it. You deserved better than how we treated you." "Thank you," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." Rosalind left, and Noah and Lila were alone in the empty courtroom. They walked out into the spring sunlight, squinting after the dimness inside. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few people lingered. Judge Whitmore was there, and he approached with a slight smile. "Well argued, Mr. Briggs. I'm glad the court saw sense." "Thank you for testifying, Judge. We couldn't have done it without you. Common decency required it. Crow was being vindictive, and vindictiveness is not justice." He tipped his hat to Lila. "Mrs. Briggs, you've got yourself a husband with a backbone. That's a rare thing. Treasure it." "I do," Lila said, sliding her hand into Noah's. "Every day." They rode back to the ranch that afternoon, and the 15 miles felt like coming home in a way they never had before. When they crested the final hill and saw their small cabin and rough corrals spread out in the valley below, Noah felt a surge of fierce, possessive love for all of it. The land, the horses, the life they'd built against all odds. Sarah was waiting in the yard when they arrived, practically dancing with anxiety. "Well, what happened? Did you win?" "We won," Lila said, dismounting and sweeping the girl into a hug. "The horse is ours. The ranch is ours. Everything we built is ours, and my father can't touch any of it." Sarah whooped and spun Lila around, both of them laughing with relief and joy. Noah watched them, watched his wife's face glowing with happiness, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. Not status or beauty or validation from strangers, but this: a home, a partner, a purpose, the bone-deep satisfaction of having fought for what mattered and won. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed in the addition and the ranch was quiet, Noah and Lila lay together in their bed with the window open, letting in the cool spring air and the sound of horses settling for the night. "I can't believe it's really over," Lila murmured. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my father to find some new way to strike at us." "He might try," Noah said. "But we beat him once. We can beat him again if we need to. Besides, I don't think he will. The judge made it pretty clear that any further harassment would have consequences. And after losing so publicly, I think your father's probably more interested in licking his wounds than continuing the fight." "I hope you're right." Lila was quiet for a moment, then said, "Did you mean what you told Rosalind? That it's not too late for her to choose differently?" "I did. People can change if they want to badly enough. We're proof of that." "What do you mean?" "A year and a half ago, I was a lonely drifter convinced I needed a beautiful wife to prove my worth," Noah said. "I thought status and money and public validation were what mattered. I was wrong about all of it. You taught me to see what's real, what has value beyond surface appearance. I changed because you showed me a different way. And I was a bitter woman who thought she'd spend her whole life hidden away, useful but never valued," Lila said. "You chose me when choosing me cost you everything you thought you wanted. That changed how I saw myself, made me believe I could be more than what my father said I was. We changed each other, Noah." "We did," he agreed, pulling her closer. "And we're still changing, still growing. That's what makes this work. We're not trying to force each other into molds that don't fit. We're figuring out how to be ourselves and be together at the same time." Lila kissed him, slow and deep, and they made love with the lazy satisfaction of people who knew they had all the time in the world. Afterward, Lila curled against Noah's side and said, "I love you. I don't think I've said it enough, but I do. I love you for choosing me, for fighting for us, for building this life with me. I love you for seeing me when everyone else just saw the wrong daughter." I love you too, Noah said, and the words felt like a gift he'd been waiting his whole life to give. For teaching me what strength looks like, for showing me that real beauty isn't about appearance, for being my partner in every way that matters. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lila Briggs. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, safe in their small cabin on their hard-won ranch. Outside, Midnight stood in his corral under the stars, no longer a killer horse, but a gentle giant who'd learned to trust. Just like his owners had learned to trust each other, and in doing so had built something far more valuable than all the status and beauty in the territory. Retry P. The victory in court changed something fundamental about how people saw the Briggs Ranch. Word spread quickly that Noah and Lila had stood up to Marshall Crowe and won, that a judge had ruled in favor of the drifter rancher and his wrong daughter wife against one of the territory's most powerful men. It was the kind of story people told over dinner and drinks, the kind that took on a life of its own with each retelling. Within weeks of the court decision, Noah started getting inquiries from across 3 counties. Ranchers who'd heard about their gentle training methods wanted horses worked. Parents who'd heard about Sarah's transformation wanted to know if there was room for their own difficult children. And always, underneath the practical requests, there was a current of something else. Respect? Maybe. Or recognition that the Briggs Ranch represented something more than just horse training. By midsummer, they had more work than 2 people could handle. Sarah had become indispensable, skilled enough now to work with the younger horses under minimal supervision. Emma came 3 days a week, still nervous but slowly building confidence. And then, in late July, a rail-thin boy of 14 showed up leading a limping horse. His name was Thomas, and he'd ridden 40 miles from a ranch near the Kansas border. "Heard you folks can fix broken things," he said, his voice cracking with adolescence and exhaustion. "Horse or people, doesn't matter which. I got both." The horse had a bad leg from being worked too hard too young. The boy had scars on his back from a father who believed discipline came from a belt. Lila took one look at both of them and said, "You can stay. We'll fix the horse and give you a place to work while he heals. Fair trade." Thomas stayed through August, then September. He slept in the barn at first, too wary to accept the offer of space in the addition. But gradually, as he saw that Noah's voice never rose in anger and Lila's hands never struck, he began to unfold like a flower too long in shadow. By October, he was sleeping in the addition with Sarah, eating meals at their table, and working with the horses with a gentle touch that spoke of deep understanding. "You've got a gift," Lila told him one afternoon as she watched him calm a skittish mare. "When you're ready, you could train horses for a living. Good trainers can write their own ticket in this territory." Thomas ducked his head, embarrassed by praise. "Don't know about that, ma'am. I'm just doing what you taught me." "That's all any of us are doing," Lila said. "Learning from each other, building on what works. You're part of this now, Thomas. Part of what we're building here." The boy's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide, and Lila pretended not to notice, giving him space to feel without scrutiny. Later that evening, Noah found her on the porch, staring out at the corrals where 3 young people were working with horses in the fading light. "We're running an orphanage for misfits," she said, but her tone was warm with satisfaction rather than complaint. "Is that what we're doing?" Noah settled beside her, following her gaze. "I thought we were training horses." "We're doing both, creating a place where broken things can heal, horses and people alike." Lila leaned against his shoulder. "Sarah's father came by last week while you were in town, said he wants her back, that he's ready to acknowledge she's good with horses after all." "What did Sarah say?" "That she'll visit, but she's not going back permanently. That she's found her place here, and she's not giving it up just because he's finally willing to admit he was wrong." Lila smiled. She stood up to him, Noah. Stood straight and tall and told him exactly what she wanted. "I was so proud I could barely stand it." "You taught her that," Noah said. "Taught her she didn't have to make herself small to please someone else." "We taught her that," Lila corrected. "This place, this life we built, it teaches people they're allowed to take up space, to be themselves without apology. That's the real gift we're giving them." As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch continued to grow. They added another small structure, basically an expanded bunkhouse, to accommodate the steady stream of young people who came seeking work and refuge. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. A few, like Sarah and Thomas and Emma, became permanent fixtures, part of the fabric of the ranch family. Not all of them were there because of difficult home situations. Some just needed a place to learn a trade, to figure out who they were away from the expectations of family or town. A quiet girl named Margaret arrived in November, sent by her parents who hoped horsework might help her find confidence. A boy called Jack showed up in December, running from a marriage his family had arranged to a girl he didn't love. Each one brought their own story, their own pain, their own hopes, and each one found the same thing at the Briggs Ranch: patient instruction, honest work, and the revolutionary concept that they were good enough exactly as they were. The winter was hard but manageable. They had money saved now, enough to buy adequate feed and make necessary repairs without panic. The cabin and bunkhouse stayed warm, the horses stayed healthy, and the young people under their care learned not just horse training but carpentry, fence mending, basic veterinary care, all the skills needed to run a ranch or start their own. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the table in the cabin: Noah and Lila, Sarah and Thomas and Emma, Margaret and Jack, and two other youngsters who'd arrived in December. It was crowded and chaotic, with elbows bumping and conversations overlapping, and it was the best Christmas Noah had ever experienced. "We should say what we're grateful for," Sarah announced, her face flushed with the warmth of the cabin and her own daring at making such a suggestion. "You first, then," Lila said, smiling at the girl who'd arrived over a year ago, hunched and ashamed, and who now sat straight and spoke her mind. "I'm grateful for this place," Sarah said simply, "for people who saw me as something other than too big and too clumsy, for Mrs. Briggs teaching me I didn't have to apologize for existing, for all of you." She looked around the table, her eyes bright. "You're my family now, the real kind, not just the blood kind." One by one, they went around the table. Each person spoke of being seen, being valued, being given a chance when chances had run out elsewhere. When it came to Lila, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm grateful for all of you," she said, "for trusting us enough to come here, to learn, to become part of this strange family we're building. And I'm grateful for my husband who chose me when choosing me cost him everything, and who's never once regretted that choice. Not even a little bit," Noah confirmed, taking her hand. "Best decision I ever made." They ate and talked late into the night, and when the young people finally retreated to the bunkhouse, Noah and Lila sat by the stove in the quiet cabin. "We did something good here," Lila said softly. "Built something that matters." "We're still building it," Noah replied. "Every day, every kid who comes through looking for a place to belong. We're building something bigger than just a ranch." "What do you think it'll become?" Lila asked. 5 years from now? 10 years? Noah considered this, looking around the cabin that had been so empty when he'd first brought Lila here, now filled with warmth and purpose. "I think we'll keep doing what we're doing. Training horses, teaching kids, creating a place where people can figure out who they are without the world telling them who they should be. Maybe we'll expand, add more buildings, take on more students. Maybe some of them will stay and become partners, help us run the place. Or maybe they'll leave and start their own ranches, spread this idea that gentleness is stronger than force, that acceptance is more powerful than judgment." "I like that vision," Lila said, curling against him. "A whole network of ranches run by people who learned there's a better way. That would be something, wouldn't it?" "It would be everything," Noah agreed. The months turned into a year, then into 2. The ranch prospered in ways that had nothing to do with money, though the money came too, steady and reliable from their horse training reputation. Their real wealth was in the lives they touched, the young people who arrived broken and left whole, the horses they gentled instead of breaking, the quiet revolution they were creating against the harsh methods that had dominated frontier ranching for generations. Sarah stayed and became Lila's right hand, able to work with even the most difficult horses with a patience and insight that rivaled Lila's own. Thomas discovered he had a gift for breaking colts to saddle, his gentle approach creating horses that trusted rather than feared. Emma overcame her terror completely and became the person they sent to work with the most skittish animals, her own hard-won courage somehow communicating itself to frightened horses. And through it all, Noah and Lila worked side by side, their partnership deepening with each shared challenge, each small victory, each quiet evening on their porch, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs. In the spring of their third year together, 2 years after that brutal court case, they received an invitation that made them both laugh with disbelief. The Redwater Crossing Town Council was hosting a territorial horse fair, and they wanted the Briggs Ranch to demonstrate their training methods. It was a complete reversal from the Bride Fair, where Noah had been dismissed as a poor drifter and Lila had been hidden as the embarrassing daughter. "Should we go?" Lila asked, turning the formal invitation over in her hands. "Face all those people who laughed at us?" "We should go," Noah said firmly. "Not to prove anything, but because we've got nothing to be ashamed of. We built something real, Lila. We don't need their approval, but we don't need to hide from them either." They rode into Redwater Crossing on a bright May morning, leading Midnight and 3 other horses from their training string. Sarah came with them, and Thomas, both young people sitting their horses with the confidence of skilled riders. As they entered the town square, the same square where Noah had first seen Rosalind and made his fateful choice, people turned to stare. But the stares were different now. There was curiosity, yes, but also respect. Word of their court victory had spread, and word of their success had spread further. The Briggs Ranch was known across 3 counties now as the place that could gentle any horse, that took on animals and young people others had given up on, that somehow turned lost causes into success stories. They set up in the demonstration area, and within minutes a crowd had gathered. Noah saw familiar faces, merchants who'd looked through him 2 years ago, ranch hands who'd mocked him, families who'd considered him beneath notice. But he also saw new faces, people who'd traveled from across the territory specifically to see the Briggs method in action. Lila stepped into the center of the roped-off area with one of their newer horses, a young mare who'd been beaten by her previous owner and was terrified of humans. The crowd went quiet as Lila stood in the center, not approaching the horse, just standing with calm confidence. "This mare was nearly killed by a man who thought violence was the way to train horses," Lila said, her voice carrying across the square. "She came to us 3 months ago, wouldn't let anyone within 10 feet without panicking. But she's not a bad horse. She's just a scared horse, and scared creatures don't need more violence. They need patience, consistency, and respect." Slowly, moving with deliberate care, Lila began to work with the mare. She talked constantly, her voice low and soothing, explaining each movement to the watching crowd. She never forced, never rushed, never made the mare feel trapped. And gradually, step by step, the terrified animal began to relax. By the end of the hour-long demonstration, Lila had the mare eating from her hand and accepting a halter. The crowd erupted in applause, and Noah felt pride swell in his chest, so fierce it was almost painful. This was his wife, strong, skilled, unafraid. The woman everyone had dismissed as the wrong daughter, showing an entire town what real strength looked like. After the demonstration, people pressed forward with questions and offers. Would the Briggs Ranch take their difficult horse? Could they send their troubled son or daughter to learn? How much did training cost? Noah and Lila fielded the questions together, their responses practiced from 2 years of building this business. And then, cutting through the crowd, Noah saw a familiar figure. Marshal Jed Crow looked smaller than Noah remembered. He'd aged badly in 2 years, his face lined with bitterness, his shoulders slightly stooped. He was still dressed well, still carried himself with authority, but something essential had diminished. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, watching Lila work with another horse, and his expression was complicated. Anger, yes, but also something that might have been regret. Noah tensed, ready to protect Lila from whatever venom her father might spew. But Crow just watched in silence for several minutes, then turned and walked away without saying a word. He looked defeated, Noah realized. A man who'd built his identity on control and dominance, forced to watch his cast-off daughter succeed beyond anything he'd imagined. "Was that my father?" Lila asked quietly, having noticed Noah's attention shift. "Yeah, he didn't say anything, just watched you work and left." "Good," Lila said, and there was no vindictiveness in her voice, just finality. "I don't need his approval or his acknowledgement. I've moved past needing anything from him." They spent the rest of the day at the fair, demonstrating techniques, answering questions, and watching Sarah and Thomas shine as they worked with horses. By the time the sun began to set, they'd booked out their training slots for the next 6 months and had a waiting list beyond that. As they prepared to leave, a woman in a simple but well-made dress approached. It took Noah a moment to recognize Rosalind. She looked different, thinner, with lines of strain around her eyes and mouth, her beauty hardened by whatever struggles the past 2 years had brought. "Lila," she said, her voice uncertain, "could I speak with you, just for a moment?" Lila glanced at Noah, who nodded. "I'll get the horses ready. Take your time." He moved away to give the sisters privacy, but he couldn't help watching from a distance as they spoke. Rosaline was animated, gesturing with her hands, and Lila listened with that same calm attention she gave to frightened horses. Finally, Lila nodded and briefly embraced her sister before walking back to where Noah waited. "What did she want?" he asked as they mounted their horses. "Help," Lila said simply. "She's trying to leave Father's house, trying to find her own way. She asked if she could visit the ranch, learn some practical skills. I said yes." Noah looked at his wife in amazement. "After everything her father put us through, you're going to help her?" "She's not her father," Lila said. "She's just a woman trying to figure out who she is beyond being decorative. That's something I understand. Besides, she's my sister. I don't have to like everything she's done to acknowledge that she's capable of change." As they rode out of town with Sarah and Thomas, Noah looked back at Redwater Crossing one last time. The square where he'd first seen Rosalind and thought she was everything he wanted. The platform where Marshal Crowe had shoved Lila forward in mockery. The spot where Noah had made the choice that had defined his entire life. He felt nothing when he looked at the square now. No regret, no longing, no bitterness. Just a mild curiosity about the man he'd been then, so desperate for validation that he'd confused beauty with value, ornamental with real. The ride back to the ranch took 3 hours, and they talked the whole way, rehashing the day's demonstrations, discussing the new training contracts, planning how to expand their operation to meet the growing demand. Sarah was bubbling with excitement about a rancher who'd specifically requested her to train his daughter's horse. Thomas was quieter, but Noah could see the pride in his posture, the way he sat his horse like someone who knew his own worth. When they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread below them in the valley, Noah felt that same surge of fierce, possessive love he always felt at this site. The cabin they'd expanded twice now, the barn with its new roof, the corrals full of horses in various stages of training, the bunkhouse where young people who'd found no place else to belong could rest easy. This was what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not status or beauty or validation from strangers, but this, a home built with his own hands, a purpose that mattered, a partner who saw him completely and loved him anyway. They settled the horses for the night, fed the stock, and checked in with the 3 youngsters who'd stayed behind to mind the ranch. Everything was in order, as it always was when they trusted their students with responsibility. They ate a simple dinner, reviewed the next day's training schedule, and finally had the house to themselves as the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. Noah and Lila walked out to their porch, expanded now, with 2 rocking chairs and a view of the entire valley. They sat side by side, watching the light fade and the first stars appear, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other so completely that words weren't always necessary. "Do you ever think about that day?" Lila asked after a long while. "The bride fair? When you chose me?" "Sometimes," Noah admitted. "Usually when I want to remind myself how lucky I am." "Lucky how?" "Lucky that I was stupid enough to chase the wrong thing long enough to find the right thing by accident." He reached over and took her hand, studying her face in the fading light. "You asked me once if I'd regret choosing you, if I'd wake up one day and wish I'd claimed Rosalind instead." "I remember," Lila said quietly. "Do you know what I was thinking when I saw her today? Beautiful Rosalind, the prize everyone expected me to want?" "What?" "I was thinking she looked tired, worn down by trying to be what everyone else wanted instead of figuring out what she wanted for herself. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't feel any desire, any sense of missed opportunity. Nothing but gratitude that I didn't end up with a beautiful ornament for a wife." He turned to fully face Lila. "Do you want to know the honest truth? The day your father shoved you forward on that platform, angry and mocking, calling you the consolation prize? That was the day fate handed me the strongest heart in the territory. I was just too blind to see it immediately. Lila's eyes filled with tears. You saw it eventually. That's what matters. I saw it because you showed me, Noah said. You taught me that strength isn't about breaking things into submission, that real beauty comes from what you build rather than what you destroy. You taught me patience and partnership and what it means to really see another person. Everything good in my life, everything worth having, came from that moment when I chose you. So no, Lila, I don't wish your father had chosen differently. I wish I'd been smart enough from the beginning to know what I know now, that you were always the right choice, the only choice that mattered. Lila wiped her eyes, laughing a little at her own tears. You're going to make me cry on a perfectly good evening. I love you, Noah said simply, not because you taught me about horses or helped me build this ranch or gave me a place to belong. I love you because you're you, stubborn and strong and so damn brave it takes my breath away. I love you because you stand straight and take up space and refuse to apologize for being exactly who you are. I love you because you see broken things and teach them they're not broken, just different. I love you because every single day for the past 2.5 years, you've chosen me back, even when I was difficult or stupid or couldn't see what was right in front of me. Noah, Lila said, her voice breaking. I'm not done, Noah said. I love you because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm spending the rest of my life making sure you know that. Every day, every moment. You're not the wrong bride, Lila. You're exactly the right woman, the only woman, the one I choose now and always. Lila pulled him close and kissed him, and Noah tasted salt from her tears and felt her trembling slightly as years of old hurt and doubt finally released their hold. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you too, she whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. You gave me everything I thought I'd never have, a home, a purpose, someone who sees me. You made me believe I was worth choosing. You've always been worth choosing, Noah said firmly. The world was just too stupid to see it. I'm grateful I figured it out before someone smarter came along and stole you away from me. Lila laughed, the sound bright and free. No one was going to steal me. I was working in my father's barn, invisible to everyone who mattered. You were the first person who looked at me and saw something other than the fat daughter who was useful for difficult horses. Then everyone else was blind, Noah said. Because when I look at you, I see everything. My partner, my wife, my best friend. The person who makes every day better just by existing. The woman who took a broken drifter and a killer horse and taught them both how to trust. You're extraordinary, Lila. You always have been. They sat together as full darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, watching stars multiply across the vast western sky. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. From the bunkhouse drifted the low murmur of young voices, kids who'd found refuge and purpose on this small ranch in the middle of nowhere. We built something good here, Lila said after a long while. Something that matters. We did, Noah agreed, and we're going to keep building it, together, for as long as we've got. What do you think people will say about us? Lila asked. Years from now, when they tell the story of the bride fair and the killer horse and the wrong daughter? Noah considered this, thinking about legacy and memory and what endured beyond a single lifetime. I think they'll say we proved that the world gets it wrong sometimes, that the prizes everyone chases aren't always worth having, and the things people dismiss are sometimes the most valuable of all. I think they'll say we built a place where broken things could heal and lost people could find themselves. But mostly, I think they'll say we loved each other, truly, deeply, in the way that changes everything. That's a good story, Lila said softly. It's the truth, Noah replied. The best kind of story. They stayed on the porch until the night grew cold, then moved inside to the warmth of their cabin. In their bed, the same narrow bed they'd shared since that first awkward night as virtual strangers, expanded now but still familiar. They held each other and talked in whispers about tomorrow's work, next season's plans, the life they were still building together one day at a time. And as Noah felt Lila's breathing even out into sleep, her body warm and solid against his, he thought about the journey that had brought them here, the desperation that had driven him to that bride fair, the moment he'd chosen Lila and heard the crowd laugh. The weeks of silent suffering as they tried to figure out how to be married to each other. The night they'd finally broken through their walls and found each other truly. Every hard moment, every struggle, every doubt had been worth it to arrive at this place, lying beside a woman he loved completely, in a home they'd built together, surrounded by evidence that their partnership created something beautiful and lasting. The killer horse in the barn had become gentle. The wrong daughter had become the perfect wife. The drifter with nothing to his name had found wealth beyond measure in the form of love, purpose, and a life that mattered. And Noah Briggs, watching his wife sleep in the moonlight filtering through their window, felt something he'd been chasing his entire life without knowing it, complete and absolute contentment. Not the temporary satisfaction of a goal achieved or a prize won, but the deep-boned satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the right person, living exactly the right life. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of spring grass and horse and home. Somewhere a coyote called, and one of the horses answered with a soft whinny. The ranch was quiet and peaceful, full of sleeping creatures both human and animal, all of them finding rest in this place that had become a refuge for those the world had dismissed. And in the cabin, at the heart of it all, Noah and Lila slept wrapped around each other, two people who'd been told they were wrong their entire lives, proving every day that together they were magnificently, perfectly right. The story that had begun with mockery and desperation had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of choosing what's real over what's expected, of building with patience instead of force, of seeing value in what others overlook. They'd taken a cruel bargain at a bride fair and turned it into a love story that would be told for generations, not because it was easy or glamorous or followed any expected path, but because it was true, because they'd fought for it and earned it and built it with their own scarred hands, because they'd chosen each other again and again through every challenge and doubt, until choosing each other became as natural as breathing. The wrong bride had become the right wife. The killer horse had become the gentle teacher. The desperate drifter had become a man who knew his own worth. And together, they'd built a life that proved the best prizes aren't the ones everyone chases, but the ones you fight to keep. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left unfinished. The story was complete. And every morning when Noah woke beside Lila, every evening when they sat on their porch watching the sun set over their hard-won land, he gave silent thanks for the day Marshal Jed Crow had shoved his daughter forward in mockery, never knowing he was handing Noah Briggs the greatest gift he'd ever receive, a partner worthy of the life they built together, and the chance to become a man worthy of her in return.